Chapter 277. Su Li. The voice was very familiar. Su Li turned her head when she heard the voice. When she saw the beautiful figure who was walking in a hurry, she was surprised. Gong Minute, you are here too? When she came to the Qinghe province at the beginning of the year, thanks to the help of Gong Shengjuan, her plan could be carried out. After Wu Yun died, Gong Minute and Gong Shengjuan were no longer in danger. After she came to Yunjing, she didn't pay attention to the Gong family. Unexpectedly, Gong Minute had already come to Yunjing and got married. While thinking, Gong Minute had walked to Su Li. She couldn't help the excitement of seeing an old friend in her eyes. If Su Li didn't stand up for her, she and her grandma would suffer. She couldn't repay her kindness in this life. Su Li, after my grandma and I came to Yunjing, the Wu family suddenly retreated. My grandma had high prestige and regained control of the Gong family. Unfortunately, I was not qualified to find you because of the level of my family. After my grandma knew your identity, she forbade me to contact you until today. Gong Minute spoke quickly, and her words naturally revealed her sincerity. It's great to see you. Su Li smiled slightly. She could see that Gong Minute was sincere and could understand Gong Shengjuan. The Gong family had many things to do and couldn't withstand the wind and waves. What's more, the whirlpool she fell into now was not as simple as the wind and waves. It's a pleasure to see my old friend in a strange place. At this moment, a handsome young man came and stood beside Gong Minute. He looked at Su Li with amazement and envy, but there was no covetousness in his eyes. Minute, I didn't expect that you know Princess Li. Why don't you introduce her to me? As soon as these words came out, Gong Minute was slightly startled, but the face of someone sitting in the wheelchair had already completely darkened. Princess Li? Not Madam Ling? Gong Minute looked a little embarrassed and said reluctantly, Child Ling, Li, let me introduce you. This is my husband. The young man nodded slightly and said, I'm Zhao Shiyuan. Nice to meet Princess Li and Child Ling. I have heard that Princess Li is talented and beautiful. Although I don't know how talented you are, I am really impressed by your appearance. The son of the Zhao family? Ling Li's eyes were burning with anger. He said in a low voice, You are just the son of the assistant minister. Who gave you the courage to be on an equal footing with me? Zhao Shiyuan's expression changed slightly, but he didn't show any fear. Instead, he said coldly, Minute, take Su Li to the table first. I want to have a good chat with Third Master Ling. Gong Min's eyes were full of worry. She glanced at Su Li and finally sighed, Su Li, I'm really sorry. It's fine. Su Li shook her head slightly and took a deep look at Ling Li. Then she followed Gong Minute and left. There were only two people left in the field. Zhao Shiyuan put one hand behind his back and straightened up. The anger in his eyes was even more intense than that of Ling Li. He said, Ling Li, a wise man doesn't speak in riddles. It has been spread in the circle that you asked the emperor to grant a marriage and married Princess Li by extraordinary means. You are not a man. Ling Li raised his eyebrows and leaned on the wheelchair. He stared at Zhao Shiyuan's clear eyes. After a while, he suddenly grinned and said, That's what I did. You are just the son of an assistant minister. What can you do? You. Zhao Shiyuan didn't expect that Ling Li admitted it directly and was so arrogant. He couldn't help but be very angry. He scolded with a livid face, Ling Li, you are really a bastard. It's not up to you to decide whether I am a bastard or not. Ling Li picked his ears and said, You should be glad that you married a good wife. Otherwise, the Zhao family, haha, the threat in Ling Li's words couldn't be more obvious. Even if Zhao Shiyuan was magnanimous and full of justice and wanted to avenge Su Li, he had to be scrupulous at this moment. In grievance, he suddenly thought of something. His eyes brightened and he sneered, Third Master Ling is really as lawless as the rumor says. Today I finally see it. However, I can't do anything to you, but it doesn't mean that everyone can. Let's wait and see. The conversation was deliberately led by Ling Li to end on a bad note. After Zhao Shiyuan left, there was no one around Ling Li except Ling Mo. He looked around and didn't see Su Li. A touch of contemplation flashed in his eyes. Zhao Shiyuan was a real man, but it was a pity that he was used by someone. At present, The situation of the Wu family and the Ma family was very delicate. Ma Jintian and Wu Jin hadn't married yet. Someone wanted to deal with him here. Who could it be? Master, the banquet is about to begin. Madam has gone to the hall. Ling Mo whispered in his ear. Ling Li immediately came to himself and waved his hand. Let's go in. At this moment, on the other side of the courtyard, Zhao Shiyuan stood in front of a handsome young man in a golden robe. He said bitterly, Your Highness, Ling Li is really as bad as the rumor says. He is arrogant and domineering. He not only directly admitted those despicable things, but also threatened me. Does he really think that no one in the Dahan country can deal with him? The eyes of the young man in a golden robe flickered, and he looked calm. When he heard what Zhao Shiyuan said, he showed a friendly smile and said, Shiyuan, I know that you hate evil and dislike playboys like Ling Li. But after all, he is a member of the Ling family. As long as he doesn't make big mistakes, not to mention me, even my father can't deal with him easily. Don't worry. If there is a chance in the future, I won't let this cancer act recklessly in Yunjing. When Zhao Shiyuan heard the words, he was relieved and said excitedly, Your Highness is wise. I believe that day will not be too far away. Ho ho, the young man in a golden robe chuckled and said, The situation is not clear. It's better to say less. Shiyuan, you are the person I value. You have unique views on literary and military strategies as well as governing the country and the people. No matter who will be the winner in the end, I hope that you can really use your views on the people. Hearing the sincere words of the young man in a golden robe, Zhao Shiyuan was excited and his eyes became red. He said excitedly, It is the right way for you to hold the ceremony in the Dahan country. I believe that your majesty will definitely make the best choice. The young man in a golden robe chuckled and didn't say yes or no. He changed the topic and said, Well, you go to the banquet first. Don't let your sister-in-law wait for a long time. I will come later. Then I'm leaving. Zhao Shiyuan came with a livid face, but he was happy when he left. The grievance brought by Ling Li had been resolved by the young man in a golden robe. How could a playboy compare with the future princess? If your highness could really ascend the throne, Ling Li would not be as comfortable as now. Watching Zhao Shiyuan leave, the smile on the face of the young man in a golden robe faded quickly and turned into deep doubt. Didn't he know that Ling Li begged the emperor to get married? He was the only prince who could move outside now. This person was the fifth prince, Dongfang Yang, the only one who benefited from the auction at the end of the year. Ling Li actually admitted it directly. Is he too lazy to explain or something else? Why does father ask us to test Ling Li this time? What is his intention? All kinds of thoughts flashed through Dongfang Yang's mind. He really couldn't figure out why the emperor suddenly gave him such a strange order. However, this was a good opportunity for him to make a performance. The fourth sister suddenly held a banquet. She probably received the emperor's order. The eighth sister also came. Is it? Dongfang Yang's eyes flashed. Nowadays, among the descendants of the royal family, other princes were not a big threat to him. Even the first prince was under house arrest in the palace by the emperor. The first sister married a small country, the second sister disappeared for many years, and the eighth sister was still young. The only threat was the fourth sister. Although the emperor would definitely consider the princes first when passing the throne, he couldn't fail miserably. Before the emperor established the throne, he must do his best. Su Li and Gong Minute accompanied each other to the banquet, which immediately attracted the attention of many men and women. Su Li's appearance was not a secret in Yunjing City. During the months when she taught in the affiliated school of the National Academy, someone painted her in private, hoping to copy the perfect appearance of Su Li in the painting. In the end, of course, it failed. But the person who painted the painting had some skills and drew some charm. As soon as the painting came out, people scrambled for it. Finally, it was bought by a mysterious person. Su Li in the painting was naturally remembered by many people. Although the banquet of the fourth princess lacked many rules, the distance of the seats still represented the status. Su Li was the daughter of the prince. Now, with the identity of Junwang Fei, the seat was naturally in the front. Gong Minute was not qualified to sit here, so she had to separate from Su Li for the time being. As soon as Su Li sat down, someone wanted to come over and chat with her. However, Ling Li appeared in time with a smile on his face. He immediately extinguished all the thoughts. Seeing this, Ling Li didn't feel ashamed at all. Instead, he laughed and said, "My wife, although my name is not very good, isn't it to save trouble? Otherwise, these great talents will definitely surround and disturb you shamelessly." Ling Li didn't mean to lower his voice at all. Many childs at the banquet heard it clearly. For a moment, their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. They were angry but didn't dare to say anything. But they all looked at Su Li at the same time. They wanted to see how the famous beauty in Yunjing would deal with it. With a faint smile on her face, Su Li nodded calmly and said, "You are right, my husband." As soon as Su Li said that, many people were dumbfounded. When a lady from a famous family saw this scene, she was a little less jealous. She smiled sarcastically and said, "Husband, didn't you say that Princess Li is pure and will certainly not succumb to the power of the Ling family? Why do I seem to follow your husband's lead?" This, many people opened their mouths and didn't know how to refute. Su Li was indeed the goddess in the hearts of many talents in Yunjing City. But today, their goddess's performance really disappointed them. "Humph. You are a group of ordinary people who only look at the surface. What do you know? Princess Li doesn't care about Ling Li at all. She can be calm in front of such a playboy like Ling Li. Even we can't do that," Zhao Shiyuan said coldly. Many people immediately agreed with him. The lady who spoke rudely just now was about to refute. Suddenly, someone saw that Su Li turned her head and looked at Zhao Shiyuan. Although her expression was indifferent and didn't show much emotion, it didn't prevent them from interpreting it as gratitude. Princess Li looks at him. Zhao Shiyuan is right. He deserves to be the first in the Faculty of Arts last year. Everyone was amazed. The lady had to swallow her words. She was so angry that she secretly stamped her feet. She looked at Su Li with more and more disgust. Chapter 278. Everyone looked along the footsteps and saw a beautiful woman in a palace dress and a young man in a golden robe. They were surrounded by more than a dozen people. The man in a golden robe was Dongfang Yang, whom Zhao Shiyuan met before, and the woman in a palace dress was the hostess of this banquet, fourth Princess Dongfang Yuyan. For a time, many juniors of lower status immediately stood up and saluted. "Greetings, fourth princess and His Royal Highness the fifth prince." The woman in a palace dress smiled and waved her sleeves. Her gentle voice spread around the banquet. "Today is just a private banquet. Don't be so polite. Sit down." "Thank you, fourth princess." After everyone was seated, fourth princess glanced at the banquet. Finally, she paused at the seats of Su Li and Ling Li. Then she turned to Dongfang Yang and said with a smile, "I didn't expect that, fourth brother. You are so busy. You have time to attend my banquet. I'm really flattered." Dongfang Yang laughed and said, "Don't regard me as an outsider. It's my duty to support you." Dongfang Yuyan nodded and said no more. Of course, she knew that Dongfang Yang was not here to support her. But she didn't want to offend her fifth brother for a credit. "Let me propose a toast to everyone first." Dongfang Yuyan picked up the wine glass and said with a smile, "You are all newlyweds in Yunjing City in recent years. I wish you a happy life together." Many people were excited when they got the blessing of the princess. They picked up the wine glass and drank it up. They said in unison, "Thank you, princess." Su Li also picked up the wine glass and took a sip. She respected Dongfang Yuyan. But Ling Li was eating and drinking by himself. He didn't pay attention to Dongfang Yuyan at all. His position was extremely close to the front. Of course, his performance was spoiled. Noticing that everyone was looking at him, Ling Li raised his head and laughed. His mouth was full of food, which was very unappetizing. Even Su Li turned her head away without a trace. Dongfang Yuyan hated Ling Li because of what happened in the past. Now she saw that Ling Li didn't change at all. She frowned slightly and then relaxed instantly. She said with a smile, "Brother Ling, are you reincarnated as a hungry ghost? Don't choke when you eat like this." Hearing Dongfang Yuyan's sarcasm, Everyone was nervous. The lively banquet immediately quieted down. Cough, cough. Ling Li seemed to be choked. He couldn't stop coughing. He grabbed the teacup in front of Su Li and drank it up. Then he hammered his chest a few times to catch his breath. He clicked his tongue and said, "Sister Yu Yang, why haven't you cured your jinx after so many years?" You. Seeing that Ling Li dared to talk about the past, Dongfang Yuyan's face immediately darkened. Her chest rose and fell violently for several times before she calmed down. She turned her head and glanced at Su Li, who looked a little embarrassed. She felt a little better and snorted, "Well, for the sake of Sister Su Li, I won't argue with you today." With that, she clapped her hands lightly, and a group of dancers floated into the garden. They danced in the middle of the banquet, accompanied by the gentle melody coming from behind the fake mountain. Su Li looked at the dance floor and tasted the Osmanthus wine. The banquet held by Dongfang Yuyan was really sincere. The wine used was the first-class Osmanthus wine of the Linli building. It cost millions of taels of silver. "Honey, how was my performance today?" Ling Li suddenly leaned over and blew in her ear. His eyes were fixed on Su Li's bulging chest. His eyes seemed to be glowing. He almost reached out to touch it. An idea flashed in Su Li's mind, and she already understood Ling Li's meaning. She was a little ashamed and annoyed. She moved away imperceptibly. Tears appeared in her bright eyes, which seemed to be full of grievances. The man sitting next to Ling Li saw this scene and got angry immediately. If Ling Li didn't fail because of his inconvenience, he would rush forward to slap the playboy. At the same time, several people sighed in their hearts when they saw this scene. Third Master Ling was such a lecherous playboy. It was so pitiful that Princess Li fell into his hands. Dongfang Yuyan and Dongfang Yang saw this scene, but they were lost in thought at the same time. Father asked me to invite Ling Li and Su Li to come here on the pretext of the banquet. Most of the purpose is to test them. I also see it. They seem to be in harmony, but they are actually in discord. Although Su Li has always shown a very obedient appearance, her grievances and dissatisfaction can't be hidden from me. Dongfang Yuyan sneered in her heart. What was father worried about? Did he really think that Ling Li and Su Li really loved each other and that the Ling family and Lord Rui's mansion would sincerely cooperate for great things? The Ling family had always disliked the Dongfang family. Uncle Rui cared about his daughter and had long been dissatisfied with Ling Li. Now the Ling family and Lord Rui's mansion might have been hostile to each other because of the marriage. Father was also old and muddled. He couldn't see through such a situation. It was better to pass the throne to her. As for the fifth brother, Dongfang Yuyan turned her head and glanced at Dongfang Yang lightly. Dongfang Yang seemed to feel it. He turned his head and showed a gentle and bright smile. "Fourth sister, is there anything on my face?" Dongfang Yuyan was shocked and said with a smile, "Nothing. I just feel that you are more and more handsome these years. You must have fascinated many young ladies from aristocratic families. I don't know if you have a suitable one in mind. The position of princess can't always be empty, right?" "You are right, sister." Dongfang Yang nodded and said with a smile, "However, I think that a man should focus on his career. There is no need to rush to get married." Dongfang Yuyan's smile was slightly stiff. She felt that Dongfang Yang's words had a hidden meaning. But at this moment, the sound of the zither behind the rockery suddenly became impassioned. The dancers heard it and stopped dancing. They stood in the middle in panic and confusion. Why did the musicians suddenly change their tune out of the blue? Dongfang Yuyan's face changed. She stood up and shouted softly, "Who dares to make trouble at my banquet? Come out!" Clang. The sound of the zither behind the rockery stopped immediately. Then, a girl who looked no older than 13 or 14 years old hopped out. Her big bright eyes were filled with innocence. She looked at all the stunned guests in the audience, but she was not surprised at all. She patted her chest and showed a sweet and innocent expression. You mortals. Listen to my fairy music. Kneel down and thank me." Dongfang Yuyan came to her sense and immediately didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Eighth sister, don't make trouble." The arrogant girl who came suddenly was Dongfang Huan-er, the eighth princess of the royal family mentioned by Dongfang Yang before. "Fourth sister." Dongfang Huan-er's eyes were bright. She trotted into Dongfang Yuyen's arms and snorted discontentedly. You held such a lively banquet, but you didn't take me to play. Huan-er is very angry. Dongfang Yuyen's eyes were full of love. She smiled helplessly. You came uninvited. Did you sneak out of the palace? Dongfang Huan-er immediately covered her mouth guiltily and stopped talking. Her naive attitude instantly washed away the dissatisfaction in everyone's heart. It turned out that she was the famous naughty 8th princess. Now they saw her with their own eyes, and they all felt that the 8th princess was very simple and lovely. Su Li looked at Dongfang Huan-er, who acted like a spoiled child in Dongfang Yuyen's arms, and frowned slightly. She had never seen Dongfang Huan-er before, but she felt that she was very familiar with her. Besides, her intuition that Dongfang Huan-er's nonsense was true. What's wrong? Don't be in a daze. Dongfang Huan-er is talking to you. Ling Li transmitted the sound in silence suddenly. Su Li was suddenly shocked and came to her senses. She saw Dongfang Huan-er pointing at her and saying, "Are you Su Li from the 8th uncle's family? I heard that you are the first talented girl in Yunjing City in the palace. You are good at zither, chess, calligraphy and painting. But you are only 16 years old. Even if you started to learn in your mother's womb, you can't be an all-rounder, right? I don't believe it. Huan-er, don't be rude. You should call her sister." Dongfang Yuyen frowned slightly. Why did this girl suddenly start to target Su Li? In fact, she had a good impression of Su Li and even sympathized with her. Compared with her husband, Ling Li was obviously worse. Dongfang Huan-er snorted and reluctantly called, "Sister Su Li." Su Li heard it and smiled slightly. Her red lips slightly opened. Her clear and sweet voice echoed in the forest garden, "Sister Huan-er is right. Although I have studied for a few years and learned skills for a few years, I can't be the first talented girl in Yunjing City." As soon as she said that, many people who were still fascinated by her voice were immediately shocked. Someone immediately defended her. "Princess Li, why do you say that? Your teaching in the affiliated school of the National Academy is more wonderful and erudite than that of the old teacher in the National Academy. All of us can see that. You deserve the title of the first talented girl. Yes, yes. I heard that you used to be the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop in the Qinghe province. Your embroidery skills are also top. You are the best embroidery artificer at the age of 16 in the whole Han country. More than that, I heard that you are also good at cooking. The famous beggar's chicken in Yunjing City was created by you." Many people who didn't know Su Li were confused. At the same time, they doubted whether the sources of the news were true or false. There were too many people fishing for fame. Su Li could win the favor of all men in Yunjing City with her beautiful face. Did she need to learn those things? Dongfang Huan-er saw so many people standing up to speak for Su Li. It seemed that she was humiliated. She became angry and said, "Everyone says you are good. I don't believe it. Since you are proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy and painting, do you dare to compete with me in zither skills?" After she said that, the noise in the field immediately quieted down. Many people looked at Su Li with a touch of expectation in their eyes. If they could appreciate Su Li's music, their trip would be worthwhile, and they would have the capital to brag in front of their friends in the future. Before Su Li spoke, a rude voice suddenly sounded and disrupted Dongfang Huan-er's rhythm. "What do you mean? Little girl, how dare you ask my wife to compete with you in zither? It is enough for me to listen to my wife's music. How can I let you ordinary people listen to it? Do you deserve it?" Chapter 279. Dongfang Huan-er was extremely favored. She was born with a golden spoon in her mouth. She had never been looked down upon like this. Her eyes turned red immediately. She grabbed the corner of Dongfang Yuyen's clothes with one hand. She was so angry that she almost cried. She said angrily like an angry lion, "Ling Li, you bastard. You will die a horrible death. Sister, do you see him bully me like this? Help me get justice." Dongfang Yuyen's expression changed slightly. She quickly stopped Dongfang Huan-er. Some words couldn't be said casually. For Ling Li, the most taboo was to curse him to death. After all, people with disabled legs couldn't practice martial arts because of blocked tendons and veins. Their life was very short. Dongfang Yuyan comforted her sister and looked up at Ling Li. As expected, she saw anger flashing in his eyes. She didn't know what trouble he was going to make. Considering the overall situation, Dongfang Yuyan had to bite her teeth and said, "Huan you are too serious. Apologize to your brother Ling Li." "Apologize? Brother Ling Li?" Dongfang Huan's eyes immediately widened. Was this the fourth sister who always loved and took care of her? At this moment, Dongfang Yang suddenly said, "I think what my sister said is not unreasonable. Ling Li, sister-in-law's talent should not be buried for anyone. You want to put everything of sister-in-law on the shelf for your own selfishness. Isn't it too much?" "What?" Ling Li frowned suddenly. Dongfang Yang's words were really vicious. He included righteousness in a few words. If he continued to pester endlessly, it might cause everyone to condemn him. Thinking of this, he glanced at other people's faces. As expected, many people were angry and had bad intentions. Although he had long been accustomed to this scene, if he continued to insist, it was not the quality that a playboy who bullied the weak and feared the strong should have. Subconsciously, he wanted to transmit the sound to Su Li to ask for her opinion. But before he took any action, Su Li transmitted the sound to him first. "Agree with him. Beg me." Ling Li was so smart that he immediately understood Su Li's meaning. But the transmission was so straightforward that he couldn't help but be angry. His expression didn't escape the eyes of others. But it happened to be in line with the helplessness of being forced. After a while, Ling Li's expression softened. He turned his head and whispered in Su Li's ear, "Honey, I also think what the fifth prince said is reasonable. Why don't you play a song for him today?" Ling Li's voice was very low, but almost everyone present had cultivation. They heard Ling Li's words clearly and immediately had a more intuitive impression of the third master of the Ling family. He gave in. He gave in just like that. As expected, he was a spineless coward who bullied the weak and feared the strong. Zhao Shiyuan frowned, his heart burning with anger. Why does the fifth prince force Princess Li to compete with eighth princess? Even I can see that Princess Li is unwilling. Although Ling Li is a little selfish, he also helped Princess Li accidentally. If fifth prince didn't say that. Jiyu Shizhou said, Princess Li is not willing to do that. He couldn't figure out why Dongfang Yang, whom he had high hopes for, behaved like a playboy like Ma Jintian instead of a gentleman. His words were despicable. Could it be that he was wrong? For the first time, he wavered in his belief. But soon he was desperate. Except for the fifth prince, who else in the royal family could make him fulfill his ambition and sacrifice his blood? It turned out that he had long known that there was only one choice in front of him. Su Li heard Ling Li's words. Although her expression was still calm, she couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. The disappointment was not obvious, but it was just caught by Dongfang Yuyan and Dongfang Yang. Immediately, both of them slightly raised their lips. It seemed that they had great confidence in the relationship between Ling Li and Su Li. Since eighth princess invited me, there is no reason for me to refuse. But I am not proficient in the zither. Let's not compete and play a song for tonight's banquet. Su Li's voice was gentle and soft. It seemed that there was a magical power to calm the hostility in everyone's heart. Her reasonable words were also admirable. In such a situation, Princess Li could take the overall situation into consideration and didn't fall out with Ling Li. She was really not an ordinary woman. Zhao Shiyuan's eyes flashed with deep admiration. He suddenly stood up and cupped his hands. Princess Li is reasonable, which is really commendable. We have no regret to listen to your zither. How dare we ask for more? Zhao Shiyuan said what many people thought. Someone immediately echoed, yes, yes. Child Zhao is right. I really admire Princess Li's state of mind. Even if she is not proficient in the zither, I believe that we can also gain something from the zither. Princess Li, please. We are all ears. Seeing such a scene, Dongfang Yang and Dongfang Yuyan's heart sank. They only tried to test the relationship between Su Li and Su Li, but ignored her personal charm. Now, being forced by them, Su Li's noble character of being pure in the mud was highlighted. Immediately, this group of scholars who read books were willing to be loyal to Su Li. Is it because of her nature or because she is scheming? Dongfang Yang was full of doubts. It was the first time for him to get close to Su Li, so he couldn't help but be a little confused. At this time, Su Li had already sat behind the zither behind the rockery. A group of musicians around her stood far away with expectation. The whole banquet hall was also quiet. Even if people ate, they chewed slowly for fear that the sound would disturb Su Li's zither. In such a waiting, Su Li's beautiful eyes were slightly gloomy. Her eyelashes under the stone lamp trembled slightly. Her fingertips stroked the zither strings one by one. In the previous life, before Ling Li was alive, she didn't learn zither. After Ling Li died, she fell into the evil circle and it was impossible for her to learn zither. Until she met Jing Xin, she calmed down and learned a lot of elegant things that she was not qualified to master. Thinking of this, clang! The zither strings vibrated, and a soothing tone like a clear spring flowed out. An extremely sad emotion also passed into everyone's heart along with the tone. This is the business from the heart and the music from the heart. Dongfang Huan was shocked and slightly opened her mouth. She was no longer arrogant. This was the highest realm of the zither circle. In this realm, the superficial level of zither skills was nothing. What really touched people's hearts were the feelings contained in the music. Even the master who had been teaching her in the imperial palace was far less emotional than Su Li. Dongfang Huan stared blankly at the direction blocked by the rockery. Then she looked at the people in the banquet hall who were intoxicated by the zither and burst into tears. She sighed and couldn't compare with Su Li anymore. She still remembered the master's words and knew what a genius Su Li was. If Su Li intended to enter the circle with zither, she was likely to break through the inborn realm before the age of 20 and become a young master. Dongfang Huan couldn't help sweating on her forehead. She secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, both Su Li and the Ling family and Lord Rui's mansion had very shallow knowledge. As long as she went back and told her father, the news tonight should not be exposed. Dongfang Huan was relaxed. She inadvertently caught a glimpse of Ling Li's moved expression and was in a trance. She couldn't help but laugh secretly. She didn't expect that this idiot, who was full of women, could have some reaction. It was really hard for him. She didn't think about it carefully. Then she also immersed herself in the zither and absorbed the inspiration from it. She would definitely make great progress in the circle of zither. Ling Li stared blankly at the direction of the rockery. It seemed that his eyes could penetrate the rockery and fall on the beautiful figure who was playing the zither. Although he had never heard this song, he was familiar with it from the bottom of his heart. It seemed that he had heard it somewhere before. Such a strange thing would make him full of speculations in normal times. But now he just wanted to immerse himself in the sad zither sound and feel the message passed by Su Li. Su Li closed her eyes. She moved her hands according to her heart. She didn't need to deliberately control it. Who thinks of the heaven and earth? Can't predict the movement of the earth. Living with the heaven and earth for a long time, the hair on the temples is like frost. Infatuated with the universe and the wilderness, looking forward to the passing of winter and summer. I wish the years will pass and the autumn harvest hidden in the winter. Longing for the dew has turned into frost. Looking forward to where you are now, wishing to go to the killing field with hatred, punishing the Avilders or returning with the emperor and dying only the old wine. How can I bear the red candlelight is cold. Looking forward to my return, my soul is wandering hand in hand with you. You have not returned. Can't he bear to see the stars and the mansions? Who has read the 1,000-word essay Autumn Harvest and Winter Hide? On the way to hell, is it a long way to go alone? Hate, only hate. I can't accompany you on this trip, my husband. What is this book? Isn't the dictionary of Dahan enough for me to learn words? It's not enough. I want you to write this down. 1,000-word classic. Yes, it's an essay from my hometown. There is only one in the world. Seeing her husband showing a rare proud look, the disfigured wife nodded with a smile even though she didn't believe it. Darling, you are right. The heaven and earth are mysterious and yellow, the universe is primitive, the sun and the moon are full. Darling, what is this word? This word is to be read. Don't be anxious. I will accompany you every day until you can understand the thousands of books in the world. Darling, clang. At the end of the song, Su Li slowly put down her hands. Tears had wet her face unconsciously. She took a deep breath and ran the genuine energy to dry the tears. Then she calmed down. Perhaps it was because there were too many things weighing down on her heart that she had been living a very depressing life. Now, through this piece of music, she had vented some of it and felt a lot more relaxed. When Su Li walked out from behind the rockery, everyone suddenly came to their senses. They suddenly found that they had shed tears, and the sadness lingered in their hearts for a long time. Dongfang Yuyan and Dongfang Yang were also not spared. No matter how evil they were, everyone had a soft spot in their heart. Princess Li's song really surprised me. There is such a fairy song in the world. We are embarrassed. Dongfang Yuyan wiped her tears and adjusted herself quickly. She said first. Dongfang Yang hadn't come out of the sadness. He nodded absent-mindedly and was no longer in high spirits. Listening to Princess Li's song is better than reading a book of sages. I have a difficult thing in my heart, but after listening to this song, I have the answer. Now I can't wait to implement it. Fourth princess, goodbye. Princess Li untied the knot in my heart. I can only repay you later. My wife, I want to go back to my hometown. Would you like to go with me? Princess Li, thank you. The banquet was noisy, but there was no sense of impetuosity. Everyone was grateful to Su Li and left with complicated feelings. After this song, the banquet obviously couldn't go on. Su Li responded with a faint smile and sent people away one after another. She was at peace. The crisis tonight finally passed. Chapter 280. The guests who hadn't left were shocked. Dongfang Yuyan reacted in time and shouted, "Where are the guards?" Swish, swish. The royal guards hiding around the garden immediately showed up. The heavy cavalry brought people a strong sense of security and immediately calmed down the commotion. Su Li glanced around and saw an acquaintance. Hu Daiden of the royal guards, the former subordinate of Wu Bin. Commander Hu, take people outside to see what happened. Dongfang Yuyan hurriedly ordered. Hu Daiden didn't dare to delay and immediately rushed out of the courtyard. After a while, he came back with an ugly face. Fourth princess, something happened. Dongfang Yuan's face changed slightly and she followed him out. The guests behind her didn't dare to leave the protection range of the royal guards and followed her closely. Su Li pushed Ling Li's wheelchair and came last. At a glance, she saw the corpse lying on the ground. She thought for a moment and remembered the identity of this person. She was a miss from an ordinary aristocratic family. However, the face of this miss now looked more like an old woman. Her whole body was pale, as if her blood had been sucked dry by something. Many misses from aristocratic families turned their heads and hid in their husbands' arms, shivering. Such a horrible death made even Hu Daiden, who had seen a lot of ferocious things in these years, couldn't help but feel cold. Dongfang Yuyan realized the seriousness of the situation. She meditated for a while and said decisively, "Contact the Supreme Judiciary and let them come to take over the case immediately. In addition, Commander Hu, please escort the guests at my banquet home. Don't make any mistakes." Dongfang Yuyan's worry was reasonable. No one knew whether the murderer was still hiding around. It was easy to deal with the family of the dead woman who was not powerful. But if one or two powerful juniors of the family died, it would be really a big deal. Maybe it would cause a storm like the child of the Ma family last time. Fourth princess, don't worry. This is the fault of the royal guards. I will not let the same thing happen again. Hu Daiden solemnly nodded his head and immediately gave the order. One by one, the couples left under his meticulous arrangements. The Ling family's status was respected, so they naturally received special attention from Hu Daiden. He assigned 2 small teams to escort them away. Ling Mo and Yun Yi naturally wouldn't say anything, although they all knew that if the hidden murderer was really more powerful than the 2 people in the sedan chair, the 2 pairs of guards couldn't stop him at all. The sky wasn't dark yet, and there were pedestrians walking on the road from time to time. It seemed calm and peaceful, and there was nothing unusual about it. Although Ling Li wanted to ask about the music, he had to focus on it first because of what had happened. He transmitted the sound, "You are proficient in pharmacology. What do you think about the corpse?" Su Li glanced at Ling Li lightly and shook her head. She didn't speak. Ling Li frowned slightly and glanced at Su Li's arm. With his eyesight, he could vaguely see the scab wound through the gauze. He had an intuition that Su Li became extremely thrifty after marriage. What she saved was not money, but genuine energy. It was clear that genuine energy could speed up the healing of wounds, but she would rather keep the wounds to heal themselves. And the transmission of sound. The transmission of sound consumed very little genuine energy, almost negligible. But when Su Li went to the banquet with him, she only transmitted a short message when Dongfang Yang forced her. Why was that? No matter how hard he thought, he couldn't figure out why the genuine energy was saved. The hidden pneuma in Su Li's body was obviously closer to the longevity realm than his. Only Su Li knew that she was in a state of only using strength. Every time she used her strength, she would be one step closer to death. If it wasn't necessary, she didn't want to waste a bit of foundation. The carriage returned to the Ling mansion safely. The captain of the royal guards who escorted them said some polite words and left. Su Li and Ling Mo were caught by Chiu Meng for a while, and then they returned to the east courtyard to restore peace. After a rest, Yun Yi and Ling Mo kept watch outside the study. Su Li brought a cup of tea to prevent Chiu Meng from checking. Then she sat next to the bookshelf and said inexplicably, "Although I learned from the miracle working doctor, the miracle working doctor is not a coroner. I just took a look at him. What can I think? However, there are countless books in your cult. Maybe there are records of evil martial arts similar to this." Ling Li raised his eyebrows slightly and realized that Su Li was answering his question on the carriage. Although her voice was still cold, he heard some worry in her words. It seemed that Li had a guess in her heart. Thinking of this, Ling Li immediately asked Ling Mo to call Ling Qinglan and asked him to consult the classics in the cult. At the same time, he was more convinced of one thing. Su Li was indeed saving the use of genuine energy. Could it be that the rain that day had left behind some sort of after effect? Recalling the situation at that time, Ling Li was shocked. He only cared about dealing with the contradiction between him and Su Li, but he ignored a very important point. That day, Li was seriously injured. Ling Li looked up at Su Li, who still had her back to him. He wanted to ask several times, but he was finally dispelled by Su Li's deliberate indifference. He knew that even if he asked, he wouldn't get an answer. At this moment, he suddenly remembered that the third elder wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. It seemed that there was something hidden from him. But at this moment, the third elder had returned to the mountain to practice in isolation. He could only ask after the third elder came out. Next to the bookshelf, Su Li looked down at the book in her hand, but her thoughts drifted far away. Ling Li's eyes were so bright that he didn't hide it. She naturally felt it. However, what was the use of confessing? She simply took advantage of the last time to finish all the things she wanted to do. Everything was her choice. She didn't want to make anyone feel guilty. She could only say sorry to the person she let down in her heart. If there was another life, she would repay him. As for the time of her death, she would hide it as long as she could. The corpse found today really made her guess. In the previous life, she was a female devil, who made people in the martial arts circle tremble with fear. There was another emerging devil who was as famous as her, named Xuexie. Strictly speaking, she was no different from Xuexie in the previous life. They both killed innocent people for their own interests. Xuexie liked to devour human blood to improve her cultivation, and she used human as medicine to refine elixirs. At that time, the martial arts circle gave them a title, Evil Duo of Blood and Elixir. Although this title brought her relationship with Xuexie closer, in fact, she didn't know Xuexie at all. She only wanted to improve her cultivation and revenge, so she was very careful. Xuexie was much more unscrupulous than her. Before long, she was besieged and killed by the righteous sects. After that, there was only Elixir Demon in the martial arts circle, but no Blood Demon. Today's murder happened. From the scream to the people going out to check, it only took a few seconds. The woman's blood was sucked dry and she died. This action naturally made him think of Xuexie. However, at this time in the previous life, Xuexie hadn't been born, so she was not sure. But in this life, she had changed too many things. No one knew whether the butterfly effect had affected the process of the birth of Blood Demon. Ling Qinglan just received the case and was confused. After receiving the news from Ling Li, he immediately had a direction and began to investigate. After a few days, it seemed that because of the intervention of the Supreme Judiciary, the murderer didn't appear again. The panic caused by the corpse was slightly relieved. In the evening, Yunyi took a letter and sent it to Su Li. The letter paper was very special. The material was not like paper, but like bark. It felt a little rough and there was no mark on it. Su Li took it and her eyes flashed. She was no stranger to the unique wood grain paper of the spiritual realm. In the previous life, she also learned the craft of making this paper and exchanged it for cultivation resources. While recalling, Su Li had already unfolded the letter. There were only a few numbers on it. In the middle of the night, let's talk in the spiritual realm, Jing Xin. After reading it, Su Li immediately got up and left the Ling Mansion from the secret passage. After many days, the Ling Mansion had been used to her existence. It was much more convenient for her to move. She didn't need to be as troublesome as before. This time, Su Li came to the stronghold of the spiritual realm from the Linli building without alarming anyone. When she just arrived at the door, she saw Chu Xiao greeting her respectfully. He saluted and said, "Senior, Great Lord has been waiting for you on the top floor for a long time." Su Li nodded gently, "Please lead the way." "Senior, you are welcome," Chu Xiao said politely. He didn't dare to neglect and quickly led Su Li in. At this moment, he was much more respectful than before. Although he reported Su Li's news without delay, Great Lord came to Dahan country in person after a few days, which made him immediately realize that Su Li's identity was more terrible than he imagined. After sending Su Li to the attic on the top floor, Chu Xiao left consciously. Su Li's heart beat slightly faster. She stepped forward and opened the door. A woman in white with her back to her immediately came into view. Sensing Su Li's coming, she turned around and showed a face. This face could be said to be extremely ordinary without any beauty. But it was not ugly. It could only be said to be ordinary and inconspicuous. If she was put into the crowd, she would be immediately drowned by people and couldn't make any waves. However, such an ordinary woman with no sense of existence at this moment gave Su Li the feeling that she was faintly integrated into the nothingness, as if she was not in the mortal world but standing in the fairyland. "You finally think of me." The woman smiled slightly, and the first sentence revealed a lot of things. Su Li didn't know why. After seeing Jing Xin, she immediately calmed down. It was a sense of peace that no one could give her. This feeling was exactly the same as in the previous life. Hearing Jing Xin's words, Su Li also chuckled. "Jing Xin, you still remember me." The relationship between her and Jing Xin was unclear. In the previous life, she was saved by Jing Xin. She was so grateful and even wanted to follow her. But Jing Xin asked her to treat her as a friend. Later, after getting along with her, she and Jing Xin became more like a teacher and a friend. Therefore, Su Li directly called Jing Xin by her name. Chapter 281. Broken Ring. This was the first time that Su Li heard this word from the mouth of someone outside Mai Ruohan's consciousness. She nodded slightly to admit it. Seeing Jing Xin's joyful look quickly become gloomy and sad, she was stunned. A sense of déjà vu emerged in her heart. It seemed that she had known Jing Xin a long time ago, even earlier than the previous life. "And it seems that you know a lot." Su Li's tone was very calm. Now that the situation was established, although she had doubts in her heart, her desire to explore the cause and effect was not strong. What could she do even if she knew? If she couldn't be revived, everything would be illusory. After more than an hour, Jing Xin calmed down. The sadness on her face faded away and was replaced by determination. Just as she was about to say something, the nothingness suddenly shook violently. The cracks in the nothingness tore directly and formed a black hole in the blink of an eye. The horrible and violent pneuma swept out with a warning. Su Li's pupils shrank suddenly, and her hair stood on end. The power that suddenly appeared was like the power of heaven. Only a wisp of it was enough to make her body collapse and disappear. This was definitely not the power of the longevity realm. Even the legendary supernatural realm could not directly tear the nothingness and form a black hole. What level of power was this? Su Li's scalp was cold. She looked at Jing Xin, but there was no fear on her face. Instead, she was furious. Warning! By now, you old things still think that I will care about any warning? Jing Xin sneered again and again. Her voice was cold. She waved her sleeves and the black hole was closed directly. A ray of pure light that Su Li couldn't notice shot into the black hole before it was closed. Then, a miserable howl came out. Even though the nothingness had returned to its original state, Su Li could still hear it clearly. Seeing such a magical scene beyond her imagination, Su Li was shocked, but not shocked. She had a vague feeling that she once had this kind of means in her memory. Outside the nothingness, a spiritual body suddenly collapsed and lost its mind. Numerous angry and embarrassed voices resounded, and there were young and old, men and women amongst them, and there were actually no less than 1,000 of them. How dare you! This realm spirit only has a trace of spiritual wisdom after we carefully cultivated it for 10 years. Jing Xin dared to kill it. Elder Mo Qin, since Jing Xin took the initiative to take action, the previous agreement, how dare you! It must be your people who cheated in secret and violated the agreement, which completely annoyed Jing Xin. Otherwise, how could Jing Xin suddenly kill you regardless of your master's safety? What a joke! This treasure belongs to your Yushu sect. How can we find it? Don't tell me you want me to mention it a second time. Mph, you're just a woman. I can't be bothered to bicker with you. Once this world is over, we'll settle this. Along with this cold grunt, the surroundings quietened down, but a strand of uneasiness lingered in Elder Mo Qin's heart, causing her to frown with worry. Why did the people of Zihon's sect suddenly become so easy to talk to? Could it be that something really happened in the mirror? Let's not talk about the debate outside the nothingness. At this moment, Su Li looked at Jing Xin, who was kneeling in front of her, and couldn't help but feel shocked. Jing Xin, the dignified lord of the spiritual realm, had a high status. For Su Li, she was more like a master. She should kneel to Jing Xin. But just kneeling was obviously not the focus of Jing Xin's determination. What she said next made Su Li fall into a sluggish state. Master, Jing Xin is guilty. Master. Su Li seemed to think that she had an auditory hallucination. She confirmed again, you, call me master? Master, I have been with you for 900 years. How can I be wrong? 900 years. Su Li was silent. She lived no more than 50 years in her 2 lives. But if what Jing Xin said was true, the origin of the foundation in the bracelet could be explained a little. Jing Xin saw the strangeness and doubt in Su Li's eyes, and she couldn't help but feel bitter. She had become the spirit of the treasure, so she naturally knew the characteristics of this treasure better. As long as Su Li didn't go out for a day, the original memory would not appear. Even so, Jing Xin couldn't help but say, you are Su Li, the first holy girl of Yushu sect, the first sect in Jiuzhou region. There are too many reasons. You don't have original memory now, so I can't explain it clearly. But I can't figure out why you broke the bracelet. Jing Xin said with tears in her eyes, although the life bracelet can save your life, it also has a fatal drawback. You broke the bracelet on your own initiative, so there is only one result. Will my soul be destroyed? Su Li suddenly said in a calm tone. Jing Xin opened her eyes widely, you know it, but why? Su Li shook her head, it's too late to know all this now. Have you heard the name Mai Ruohan? Mai Ruohan. Jing Xin's eyes immediately brightened, and she showed extreme hatred. Master, Mai Ruohan is your junior sister apprentice. She is the second inherited disciple of Yushu sect. Although she doesn't have the title of holy girl like you, her cultivation has reached the Jindan realm. You can't underestimate her. Master, is it because of her that you changed? Su Li was thoughtful. There was a lot of unrevealed information in her words. At this moment, she didn't know why she suddenly thought of what the old beggar said when she first came to Yunjing City. Sure enough, the world is fake, and people can't be counted. The world is fake. Could it be that this world is fake at all? Jing Xin, where is the Jiuzhou region that you told me? I have lived 2 lives. Why have I never heard of it? Jing Xin was embarrassed when she heard the words. It seemed that she was considering whether her master, who had lost all her memories, could accept it if she told the truth. Seeing Jing Xin's reaction, Su Li narrowed her eyes and said slowly, "Is it possible that there are other worlds besides this one?" Jing Xin was shocked when she heard the words, "Master, do you remember it?" Su Li shook her head. "I do feel a little familiar with you, but I just feel familiar with you. I have no impression of the Jojo region and Yushu sect that you mentioned." Jing Xin couldn't help but show a touch of disappointment, but she quickly recovered and said quickly, "Master, the spiritual body outside was used to monitor me. Although it was killed by me, it will soon appear again. The truth can't be told in 3 days and 3 nights. We don't have so much time, so we have to make a long story short. To be exact, this world is not a world at all, but an illusory realm created by a treasure. The outside world is the real world. As for the name of that world, I don't know. This treasure is called the reincarnation mirror. In those days, this treasure made many forces jealous, and they attacked Yushu sect together. Because of the disaster of destroying the sect, you had to choose to take the risk and open the reincarnation mirror. You let all the young people in the Jojo region enter it and made an agreement to compete for the dominance of the reincarnation mirror according to their abilities. At that time, you were already the half-owner of the reincarnation mirror. From the beginning, the whole dreamland revolved around you. However, I don't know what method Zahon sect used, but they forcibly transferred the chi to Suzipei of their sect, which caused your fate to plummet and you suffered a lot. I was your servant. At that time, the situation was critical, so I had to sacrifice myself. Speaking of this, suddenly there was a slight fluctuation in the nothingness. Jing Xin's face changed slightly, and her voice stopped abruptly. She waved a gentle force to send Su Li out of the spiritual realm. At the same time, Jing Xin's last words came to her ears. "Master, since you have broken the bracelet, you don't have to worry about what to do. Leave the outside world to me." After the voice came out, the scene in front of Su Li changed. She was already in a quiet broken temple. The morning sun shone through the cracks on the roof, which seemed quiet and soft. But at this moment, Su Li was more confused and complicated than ever. Jing Xin could kill the existence of tearing the nothingness with a wave of her hand. There was no need for her to lie to herself. What she said was probably true. But if what she said was true, everything that she had always believed in and stuck to would be subverted with the end of this life. Everything in the illusion, including relatives, friends, even Ling Li, was fake. Then what was the point of continuing? At this moment, Su Li fell into a confusion that she had never experienced before. 2 days had passed unconsciously. In the past 2 days, except that the Supreme Judiciary was very busy, the Linli building, the Enmore cult and the Dongfang family were all very calm. The sudden appearance of the evil circle made all forces in Yunjing City not as tense as before, and they had a chance to breathe. However, everyone in the game knew that when the murderer was caught, the ensuing waves would be more turbulent. "Li, you have been restless these days. Did this brat bully you?" During the dinner, Chiu Meng asked with concern. Ling Li stopped eating and looked up at Su Li. Even his mother could see that Su Li was in a bad state, so could he. But no matter how he asked, Su Li didn't answer and looked at him strangely, as if she was confirming something. Facing Chiu Meng's question, Su Li was still rational. Finally, she didn't ignore her. She forced a smile and said, "Mother, I'm fine. I just miss home recently." "I see." Chiu Meng suddenly understood. She thought of the hardships that Su Li had suffered since she was a child. She couldn't help but feel distressed. She said, "It's my negligence. You and your father just met each other, and then you married here. You should miss home. Tomorrow, Ling Li will accompany you to visit your family. It doesn't matter if you stay for a few more days." "Thank you, mother." Seeing that Su Li agreed and smiled, Chiu Meng was relieved and didn't care about it anymore. The next morning, Chiu Meng ordered people to prepare carriages and guards and let Ling Li accompany her to the Lord Rui's mansion. Dongfang Rui was overjoyed to see his daughter coming back. He quickly asked Wu Bin to arrange a family banquet. The food was the best of the Baisho building. Even if it was simply processed, it would be delicious. What's more, it was the chief chef of the Baisho building who prepared it. Ling Li also stopped acting and paid a formal visit to his father-in-law, which relieved Dongfang Rui's worries and made him feel gratified. Chapter 282. Perhaps because of Dongfang Rui's meticulous care and Ling Li's care, Su Li seemed to recover some spirit after living in the Lord Rui's mansion for 3 days. She was no longer in a trance. These days, Ling Li didn't relax his investigation. He wanted to know where Su Li went that night. But no matter how he investigated, he couldn't find any clues. In desperation, Ling Li had to give up the investigation temporarily. The second brother had gone to battle. Half of the people he trained had rushed to the battlefield in Nanjiang country. There were not enough people in Yunjing city. After living in the Lord Rui's mansion for half a month, Su Li returned to the Ling mansion with Ling Li. In the past half a month, many people in Yunjing city were drained of blood and died. The Supreme Judiciary didn't catch the murderer. The emperor was furious and asked the Chen Palace of the Ministry of Penalty to thoroughly investigate the case and catch the murderer. Ling Qinglan was very busy. Ling Li was in charge of the war in Nanjiang country. He had no time to hang around outside. Time passed quietly. Su Li's heart was completely at peace. She was no longer tired by Jing Xin's words. She had already read Yin Xuetong's letter. The decision of Fang Yuan and others made her feel at ease. At least after she left, even without Wen Tingshan's support, Fang Yuan's cultivation was enough to be independent. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. It was early autumn. It drizzled in Yunjing city. There were fewer pedestrians outside. It was very quiet and peaceful. The air was mixed with rain and mist with a trace of coolness. Su Li sat in the front porch of the study and watched the rain running down the eaves. A light flashed in her eyes. She was no longer confused. During this time, she figured out a lot and remembered a lot of details. Even her memory of the outside world was vaguely restored because of the broken ring. At this moment, she no longer cared about the truth or falsehood. Jing Xin's knowledge was not comprehensive and she didn't know much. But the hints given to her were enough. Although the scene of the illusion couldn't be real, it should be used as a reference. Zhozhou region was probably a place where sects gathered like the spiritual circle. Yushu sect was one of the sects. Su Li just didn't know the strength of the sect. However, a sect that possessed a treasure like the reincarnation mirror would definitely have a powerful background. The younger generation of the sects in Zhozhou region all gathered in the realm of reincarnation. The world was fake, but the people in it were real. The feelings between people naturally couldn't be fake. The life ring was a treasure that could save one's life. She had already confirmed the drawbacks through herself. It was obvious what the life-saving effect was protecting. It was the soul. Except for the anomaly in my Ruahan's mind, everyone who entered the realm of reincarnation should abandon their memories. Their souls were like newborn souls integrated into the reincarnation Tao of the realm of reincarnation. Naturally, they needed protection. Moreover, the so-called sects in Zhozhou region would be on guard against her, the real owner of the reincarnation mirror. Therefore, she couldn't kill anyone in the illusion unless the ring was broken. Thinking of this, a sharp light flashed in Su Li's eyes, as if the air in front of her was cut open. Ling Xian and even Zhu Yang might not have died, but they had returned to the outside world. While thinking of the two, my Ruahan's figure appeared in Su Li's mind again. Her eyes were complicated for a moment and soon returned to coldness. My Ruahan, who had no memory of her predecessor in the reincarnation mirror, had no malice to her. But the consciousness in her mind caused her to end up like this. She must erase it. Even if she didn't say it, Jing Xin would not let her go. Maybe the consciousness had been annihilated now. But whether Jing Xin was still fighting with the existence in the nothingness, Su Li couldn't know, let alone find her. Are all the people who enter here the younger generation? Su Li muttered to herself. She didn't know how old the definition of the younger generation in that world was. Jing Xin said that she had followed her for 900 years, so her real age was at least 900 years old. Such a young soul could incarnate into any age level when she came to the reincarnation mirror. According to Jing Xin, it's no wonder that Su Zipei could ascend to the position of empress in the previous life. She took my luck, and the whole world revolved around her. The more I assassinated, the stronger the backlash of luck. That's why I ended up dying tragically. In this life, with the help of Jing Xin, I was the owner of the reincarnation mirror. Naturally, luck gathered. It was quite smooth all the way, and there were almost no particularly dangerous obstacles. One doubt after another was solved through constant confirmation. Su Li's thinking became clearer and clearer. Suddenly, her chest tightened, and she thought of a problem that made her feel suffocated. Ling Li. If he was also transformed by someone from the outside world, would he still remember her after he went out? Would he still remember that he had a wife in a false world? Or, everything was really an illusion? After she died, all kinds of things between her and Ling Li would also disappear, leaving no trace. Thinking of this, Su Li's face instantly turned pale, and her mind trembled. Blood surged from her throat, and she fainted on the ground. Ling Li, who heard the movement in the room, was confused. He spread out his psychic awareness a little and saw the situation outside the room. Suddenly, his face changed dramatically, and his mind went blank. He couldn't care about anything anymore. He rushed to the door, picked up Su Li and rushed into the room. The door was closed. Tang Lei, who just walked to the door of the yard, saw the last moment. He was so shocked that he couldn't help rubbing his eyes. Seeing the closed door of the study, he couldn't help but mutter to himself, "Is it because of losing weight that my eyes are damaged? Why did I see Brother Li stand up just now?" With a trace of doubt, Tang Lei moved closer. When he was about to open the door of the study to find out, Ling Mo suddenly appeared like a ghost. Tang Lei was so scared that his soul almost flew away. Master said that now no one is allowed to get close to the study. "Master Tang, you come at the wrong time. Please." Hearing Ling Mo's cold words, Tang Lei was not angry. He had long been used to the temper of Brother Li, the servant, but, in the daytime, what can Brother Li do? Why must he stay in the study? Tang Lei looked strange, and suddenly a very absurd idea came to his mind. He blushed. He knew that the idea was absurd, but it was reasonable for Brother Li. "Ling Mo, did you see who Brother Li carried into the study just now?" Tang Lei suddenly asked. Ling Mo looked slightly serious, and his tone remained unchanged. "No, the door of the study has been closed since the morning." "Sure enough, I was wrong," Tang Lei murmured. Thinking that he didn't see Su Li in the wing room just now, he suddenly smiled and said in a wretched voice, "It has been almost 4 hours since the morning. I didn't expect that Brother Li's ability is not inferior to mine." Ling Mo's face darkened. Tang Lei really dared to say anything. If it was heard by Madam, the result would be, thinking of Madam, Ling Mo was worried. He glanced at the room and finally dragged Tang Lei, who wanted to peep, away. Now the two people in the room couldn't stand to be disturbed. At this moment, on a wide soft bed in the study room, Ling Li was healing Su Li's wounds by running his cultivation. The soft bed in the room was originally used for Ling Li's rest. Later, after he married Su Li, it was immediately changed by Chiu Meng to a big bed that could accommodate 2 people. After a while, Su Li woke up slowly. She felt the warm, genuine energy coming from her back. Her body was stiff for a while, and then a lingering fear rose in her heart. Fortunately, in order to slow down the consumption of the practice method in her body, she sealed 99% of her cultivation. Otherwise, with her protective genuine energy of the longevity realm, if Ling Li ran genuine energy into her body rashly, he would be seriously injured in an instant. In just half a year, Su Li easily promoted to the longevity realm with her foundation. She deliberately saved consumption and reduced the practice speed. Otherwise, it would be several times faster. However, Ling Li's cultivation still stayed at the peak of the inborn realm. It seemed that there was only a thin line between him and the longevity realm. But no one knew when the thin line would be broken. Noticing that Su Li woke up, Ling Li breathed a sigh of relief, but he still didn't dare to relax. He asked with concern, "Li, how do you feel now?" "Why?" In the middle of the words, Ling Li suddenly felt something wrong. He frowned for a moment and couldn't help but smile bitterly. He subconsciously used the name Li again. In order not to annoy Su Li, he hadn't called Su Li like this for more than half a year. Su Li was stunned. She recalled her thoughts before she fainted. After a moment of silence, she got up and got out of bed. When she walked a few steps and was about to leave, she inadvertently saw that the wheelchair was still in front of the table outside. Her figure came to a standstill. At the same time, the disappointment on Ling Li's face also turned into astonishment. Because he saw Su Li suddenly turned around and smiled at him. "My body is fine. Don't be so impulsive in the future. The Ling family can't afford the royal family's strife." Su Li's tone was so light that no emotion could be detected. But Ling Li felt the long-lost warmth. It seemed that the ice cubes in his arms for more than half a year finally melted. Was Li finally willing to let go of the hatred? Or did he think too much? The mentality of worrying about gains and losses reappeared. Hearing the footsteps, Ling Li suddenly woke up. He looked up and saw that Su Li was not at the door. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. The hatred of killing relatives was not so easy to resolve. But now at least he saw hope. Why did Li vomit blood for no reason? When I healed her, there was nothing serious in her body. It seemed that she just fainted because of the intense emotion. But now everything is peaceful. What could stimulate Li to vomit blood? After thinking for a while, Ling Li had many doubts. But as before, he couldn't get the answer. He could only put everything in his heart and wait for Su Li to change her mind. Dispelling the thoughts in his mind, Ling Li shook his head slightly. He got up and went to the outer room of the study. His eyes suddenly fixed on the teacup on the table. Now, Chiu Meng wouldn't come to the east courtyard for a surprise inspection. Then this cup of tea. Chapter 283. Unconsciously, it was getting late. "Miss, Master, time to eat." Mammy Li wiped the water on her hands and opened the door to greet them. Recently, the industry of the Ling family gradually entered the peak season. Chiu Meng was so busy that she had no time to eat at home. Ling Li didn't need to go to the main courtyard to accompany her. For the convenience of going in and out, Mammy Li was in charge of the meal. After Ling Li heard it, before he had time to respond, he saw Ling Qinglan coming in hurriedly with a dignified face. Ling Li looked slightly serious and immediately said, "Mammy, tell Li that I have something important to do and can't eat for a while." Mammy Li had been a servant for decades, so she was good at observing people's expressions. She immediately nodded and turned away. Ling Qinglan was slightly surprised when he heard that Ling Li called her Li again. But at this moment, he had no time to care about it. He said very quickly, "I cooperated with Chen Gong to investigate the mummy case thoroughly and finally found the whereabouts of the murderer." "Found?" Ling Li was suddenly shocked and said without hesitation, "Take the elites and let's go immediately." "You also go?" Ling Qinglan hesitated and glanced at the direction of the wing room. "Although Gushan is not far from Yunjing, it will take a few days to come back." Ling Li smiled slightly and said, "Li is not an ordinary woman. If she didn't remind us, we couldn't find the murderer so quickly. Since the murderer is likely to practice the evil blood skill, he can't be resisted by ordinary people of the inborn realm. Instead of wasting the elites of Yunjing, it is better for me to go in person." Ling Qinglan nodded gently and said with envy, "You have a good wife." Ling Li was slightly stunned and immediately laughed at himself. "Don't make fun of me. It's not too late. Let's go." Shortly after they left, Chiu Meng came back in a hurry and got the news. She was surprised for a long time and then she said with relief, "I didn't expect that the boy could also think of helping Qinglan." The old mammy beside her smiled and said, "Madam, since the young master got married, he has never fooled around. Now he wants to do business. He must have completely changed his bad habit." Chiu Meng nodded with a smile and said, "Good. Thanks to Li, I don't feel ashamed to face the ancestors of the Ling family." 2 days passed in a flash. Su Li practiced quietly in the east courtyard alone. She was very comfortable. During this period, Chiu Meng came to see her once. Seeing that Su Li was not angry because Ling Li suddenly went out, she was relieved. On the third day, in the quiet study, Su Li sat cross-legged on the soft couch and suddenly woke up from meditation. Her eyelashes trembled and she suddenly opened her eyes. What's going on? Why am I so distracted that I can't even maintain my meditative state? Su Li frowned and muttered to herself. She had reached the longevity realm, so she could sense the coming disaster. Disaster. Ling Li. Yun Yi. Yun Yi, who was guarding at the door, immediately came in. Ling Mo had received the secret report yesterday and went to Nanjiang. Now, except for Su Li, there was only Yun Yi who stayed in the Ling mansion. With the support of Su Li, the cultivation of the 10 guards of the Yunj sect had a breakthrough. Among them, Yun Yi had the greatest improvement. He had been with Su Li all the time. What he saw and heard was a profound pneuma. Now he was a senior in the inborn 8th hurdle, which was not inferior to Ling Mo. What can I do for you, miss? Do you know where Ling Li went a few days ago? Su Li said directly. Yun Yi was slightly stunned and immediately tried to recall. After a while, he said uncertainly, Child's place seems to be called Lonely Mountain, but I don't know where it is. Su Li's eyes flashed and she immediately interrupted, Lonely Mountain in the north of Yunjing City. Prepare a horse that can travel thousands of miles a day for me. Right now. Yun Yi looked slightly serious and said, Miss, I will go with you. No. Su Li frowned slightly and said, You have to stay to cover for me. Don't be discovered by the Ling family during my absence. Just in case, I will ask Yin Shuetong to come over. You should cooperate with me and put on a good show. Miss, Yun Yi looked embarrassed. His primary task was to protect Su Li, but now Su Li had to take risks alone. I have made up my mind. You don't have to say more. Su Li was expressionless. She waved her sleeves and made a decision. She said lightly, Besides, if I can't explode myself with my cultivation, you can't protect me. Yun Yi didn't say anything and turned around to execute the order. In reality, his improvement in the past 6 months was already very great, but compared to the miss, it was still insignificant. He felt very helpless. Ever since he became the Miss Guard, he seemed to have taken on more of the role of a follower. It was really too difficult to surpass the miss in terms of cultivation. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, a man in white with a bamboo hat left Yunjing City on a horse. There were countless people in Jianghu who dressed like this every day. Naturally, this scene didn't cause any disturbance. Lonely Mountain. This lonely mountain towered into the clouds, and the top could not be seen. No other mountain could have such an amazing height, so it was named Lonely Mountain by idlers who came to see it. At this moment, the top of Lonely Mountain was shrouded in clouds and mist, and a strong smell of blood permeated it. Looking closer, it was faintly seen that 2 sides of people confronted each other. One side had only 1 person, while the other side had dozens of people. But it was unknown why such a huge gap in numbers still made the side with more people dare not to take action. In the surroundings, it could be seen that there were more than 20 corpses lying on the ground. Among them, people dressed in the Supreme Judiciary's clothes accounted for 80%. It could be imagined what kind of fierce fighting had happened here in the past 2 days. Seeing this, there was no need to guess the identity of most people. It was Ling Li and Ling Qinglan. At this moment, Ling Qinglan's state was not very good. The clothes of the officer of the Supreme Judiciary were tattered and stained with blood. His face was even more terrible because of excessive blood loss. I was careless. Ling Li looked dignified. Although his state was much better than Ling Qinglan's, the genuine energy in his body was less than 20%, and his strength declined greatly. On the contrary, the man in a bloody robe with disheveled hair was full of vigor and violent. Although his mind seemed to be affected by the evil martial arts, his strength was not weakened at all. Ha 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 ha. The man's eyes flashed with red light, and he laughed wildly. He stared at Ling Qinglan with a ferocious expression. I remember you. You ruined my family and made me go on this road of no return. Now I become like this, which is neither human nor ghost, thanks to you. And you. In the middle of speaking, the man suddenly pointed to Ling Li. You are with him. If you dare to stop me from taking revenge, all of you will die. Ahem. Ling Qinglan's mouth was bleeding, and his injury was getting worse, but his expression didn't change. He said coldly, Lin Yanxing, the Lin family really deserved what happened in those days. The supreme judiciary is just impartial. You still have time to turn back. A bunch of nonsense. Hearing Ling Qinglan call his name, the man in the red robe immediately went crazy. How dare you call my name? Ling Qinglan was silent. He had achieved his goal, and he couldn't continue to stimulate Lin Yanxing. I was the first genius in the Qinghe town at that time. How glorious it was. If you didn't intervene, I would have been successful and famous and entered the National Academy. Ha 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 ha, it's destiny. Ling Qinglan, you didn't expect that I would have a change of fortune, right? Speaking of this, the man in the red robe seemed to notice something. He looked at Ling Li and grinned gloomily. I see. You are stalling for time. I won't let you get what you want. Before he finished his words, he rushed out and turned into a bloody shadow. His right hand was like a claw, and he grabbed Ling Li. Oh no. Ling Li's face changed. In the blink of an eye, he retreated for dozens of feet and got out of the attack range. The man in the red robe couldn't catch up with him, but he did something on the way. The claw suddenly accelerated extremely strangely and grabbed Ling Li's chest. Ling Li couldn't avoid it, so he had to snort and fight with his fists. Boom! The powerful impact turned into a visible wave and spread. For a moment, the sand and stones splashed like a terrible tornado. Puff puff puff. Several disciples of the Enmore cult with low cultivation vomited blood and flew backward. Even Ling Qinglan was shaken and his pneuma was even weaker. Bang! Bang! Two loud noises sounded. The two figures, one red and one black, finally separated. The man in the red robe retreated 5 steps, but Ling Li retreated dozens of steps before he could stop. As soon as he stood still, he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood, and his pneuma weakened at a speed visible to the naked eye. He was seriously injured. He was seriously injured with just one blow. After this man absorbed the blood of others, he became stronger. You can still escape. Then I'll give you another claw. Go to hell. Go to hell. Go to hell. Lin Yanxing laughed and rushed up. Although his mouth was also bleeding, his injury was much lighter than Ling Li's. Fortunately, it seemed that he couldn't use his speed for the time being, so Ling Li had a chance to breathe. While using his body movement, Ling Li quickly calmed down his pneuma and blood and thought about countermeasures. But at this moment, he suddenly heard Ling Qinglan's exclamation, "Be careful." Lin Yanxing's steel-like hard nails on his right hand extended for a few inches in the blink of an eye. It was the distance of a few inches that made Ling Li's dodging body movement become useless. Ling Li's pupils shrank suddenly. He was about to speed up regardless of his injury, but Lin Yanxing's speed was strangely accelerated again. The nails like a knife went straight to Ling Li's neck. Oh no! Ling Li's face finally changed dramatically. The skin on his neck could feel the cold sharpness. In the next moment, his neck would be cut and he would die on the spot. Ling Li! Ling Qinglan roared. He gathered all his strength and threw countless hidden weapons to the back of Lin Yanxing, but Lin Yanxing didn't mean to dodge at all. His eyes were full of red light, and he shouted crazily, "Ha ha ha, go to hell." At this critical moment, a white figure climbed to the top of the mountain. It crossed a distance of dozens of feet in one step and appeared between Ling Li and Lin Yanxing. A white hand gently grasped Lin Yanxing's claw. Ling Qinglan was almost stunned, and the white figure said something very familiar to him. Chapter 284. Lin Yanxing only felt that his right hand was tightly gripped by Su Li. His bones made a sound of being overwhelmed. He was almost about to be crushed in the next moment. What was more terrible was that Su Li's other hand had already pressed to his chest like lightning. The landslide and tsunami made him suffocate. How could it be possible? His bones were tempered by the treasure and were tougher than the sword. How could he be so weak in the hands of this person? He couldn't compete with her. He couldn't defeat her. Lin Yanxing's heart was full of fear. At the critical moment, he showed a ferocious look and scratched his right hand without hesitation. His right hand was immediately cut off from his wrist. Taking this opportunity, he retreated without hesitation. He instantly turned into a rainbow shadow and was about to escape. At the same time, a roar with unforgettable hatred resounded through the mountain top. No matter who you are, break one of my arms. When I succeed, you will be the first one to be killed. Su Li narrowed her eyes and showed a sense of mockery. Want to leave? She stepped out, and the ripples under her feet reverberated. Her figure suddenly disappeared, and when she reappeared, she was already at the top of the mountain. Compared with Lin Yanxing, she was much faster at such a strange and horrible speed. Ah! A scream came from a distance, mixed with a strong panic. Who are you? Why do you meddle in my business? Ling Li didn't come to himself until he heard the scream. He took a deep breath and swallowed the blood in his throat. All of this happened in a flash. He was still between life and death in the last breath. The next breath, with the arrival of Mr. Li, the situation of the two sides was instantly reversed. Ling Li, are you okay? Ling Qinglan dragged his seriously injured body and walked slowly to Ling Li. Ling Li shook his head. I won't die. Ling Qinglan couldn't help but smile bitterly. We were almost doomed. If we really died here, the Ling family would be in danger. Ling Li was silent, but there was a trace of fear in his heart. Those elders of the Enmore cult were not good people. Now they just thought that he had the potential to revive the Enmore cult. If he really died, they would never care about the Ling family. Fortunately, Mr. Li came. Ling Qinglan breathed a sigh of relief. He took out an elixir and began to heal himself. He couldn't help but sigh. Mr. Li has been practicing in seclusion for more than half a year. It seems that the people of the Linli building also practiced with him and disappeared. I didn't expect that he would appear in time to save me. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's a miracle. Ling Li was silent and nodded slowly after a while. He knew that Mr. Li's cultivation had surpassed him and reached the longevity realm. Although he did not feel that his aptitude was the best in the world, it did not feel good to be surpassed by others. Moreover, this person had always been regarded as his love rival. While they were talking, Su Li returned with Lin Yanxing, who was dying. Her white clothes were still spotless. It could be seen that the battle was not difficult. However, Su Li was a little uneasy under the bamboo hat at this moment. Lin Yanxing didn't practice the bloody evil skill, but because, Mr. Li, are you okay? Ling Qinglan's words interrupted her recollection. Su Li came to her sense and immediately nodded. I'm fine. This person's practice has been abolished by me. He is no longer a threat. Lord Ling can close the case. That's really great. Thanks to Mr. Li's timely rescue, otherwise the consequences would be unimaginable. Ling Qinglan couldn't help showing his joy. In the past half-month, Dongfang Xiao almost wanted to kill him. He was really under great pressure. Hearing Ling Qinglan's words, no matter how uncomfortable Ling Li was, he knew that he really owed Mr. Li his life for this action. He immediately clenched his fists and said dryly, "Thank you." Su Li nodded slightly and accepted his gratitude. But soon Ling Li heard the ridicule. I didn't expect that Hierarch Ling would also thank me. I'm really flattered. Ling Li's face immediately darkened. He transmitted the sound regardless of his serious injury. The relationship between you and me is not good, but it is not to the point of hostility. Since you can come to save me, everything in the past will naturally be written off. Ho ho, right off. What if I say that the message was sent to me by Su Li? Su Li suddenly said, but Ling Li smiled slightly and retorted confidently, Li's words and deeds these days have all been noticed by me. She has lost contact with you. How could she send a message to you in time? Su Li looked at Ling Li, who pretended to be calm and couldn't help laughing in her heart. As Ling Li, she didn't care about him and couldn't care about him. Unexpectedly, he was full of nonsense outside and flattered himself. She had to say that he was childish and cute. Thinking of this, Su Li no longer teased him. She followed Ling Li's meaning and said with a smile, I didn't expect that Hierarch Ling and his wife loved each other so much. The message was not sent to me by Su Li. The Linli building naturally has its own source of information. I saved you because I didn't want Su Li to be sad. Besides, I did my best to help you. I hope you can understand. Of course I understand. How dare Ling Li demand more? Ling Qinglan, who stood aside, saw them flirting with each other. If he didn't know that they were secretly transmitting the sound to each other, he would think that they were infected with strange hobbies. After a fight, it was getting late. Ling Qinglan recovered a little and immediately commanded others to clean up the battlefield and prepare to go down the mountain. Although Ling Li was seriously injured, he had reached the peak of the inborn realm after all. After healing for a while, his injury had been stabilized and wouldn't affect his action. He glanced at Mr. Li, who was standing in front of him and seemed to protect him. He felt strange. He always had a doubt. Why did Mr. Li save the Ling family? This time he had Su Li as an excuse. But the last assassination in the hunting ground showed that the relationship between Su Li and him was not close. When Ling Li organized his words and wanted to ask, Su Li said first, "I think Hierarch Ling is only one step away from the longevity realm. Here is an elixir. It must be of some use to you." Su Li turned her palm and a jade-like elixir appeared in her hand. A strong smell of medicine spread. "I prepared this elixir for myself. Now that I have broken through, the elixir is of no use. It's better to help you achieve your goal." Ling Li was slightly stunned and then surprised. Just by smelling the fragrance, he knew that this thing was precious. If he took it, he could definitely reach the longevity realm within half a month. But how could he afford such a treasure with the relationship between him and Mr. Li? "Mr. Li, forgive me for my rudeness. But, why don't you give such a precious elixir to someone with more potential in the Linli building?" Ling Li asked in confusion. Su Li slightly paused and sighed in her heart. She was too impatient. But, she didn't have much time. After the confrontation with Lin Yanxing, she understood it more. Although the elixir is precious, I can refine the first one. Naturally, I can refine the second one. And now there is no younger generation in the Linli building who is stuck at the peak of the inborn realm. If I can use words to exchange for your friendship, why not? Maybe the Linli building will need your help in the future. Su Li's reason was a little far-fetched, but Ling Li didn't think for a long time. He took the elixir with a smile and said, "Mr. Li, you really like to joke. You are in the Linli building. Why do you need my help? However, if the Linli building is in danger one day, I will definitely help you." He noticed the doubtful point in the words of Mr. Li, but his situation didn't allow him to think more. The pressure from all sides almost made him breathless. He was more eager to break through the longevity realm than anyone else. Only by breaking through could he really control the power of the Enmore cult and have the capital to compete with the royal family. On the same day, the news that the murderer of the murder case was arrested spread throughout the capital, but it had nothing to do with Su Li. She didn't hesitate to use the bodily movement to return to the Ling mansion in advance. But she got the news that Ling Qinglan and Ling Li went to the imperial palace to receive the reward. Fortunately, it was not completely useless to try to come back. At least, Qiu Meng came to tell her the good news that Ling Li solved the case. She didn't reveal any flaw. Dongfang Xiao should not know Ling Li's real identity. This trip to the imperial palace should be daunting but not dangerous. "But we can't take it lightly," Su Li murmured with her eyes shining. If the secret was really exposed, no matter what was hidden in the imperial palace, she must take action. Hate. There was no hatred in her heart because Su Yu should still be living well in the outside world. Whether Su Yu still remembered her or not, she had no regrets. While waiting, Su Li didn't meditate. She couldn't help but think of the strange scene when she chased Lin Yanxing in the daytime. Under the pressure of her strength, although Lin Yanxing's martial arts were strange, he couldn't escape. He was beaten half to death by only one palm. But Lin Yanxing was like an immortal cockroach. No matter how serious the injury was, he could recover in an instant. Even the claws that were cut off by him before grew back. Helplessly, she had to kill him again and again. As the number of recoveries increased, Lin Yanxing became more and more blurred. Finally, he took out something from his heart. It was a crystal-clear blood-colored bead. The bead of blood left his body and immediately turned into an extreme red light rushing into her body. The speed was beyond the range of her reaction. She couldn't stop it even if she wanted to. Almost instantly, a desire for blood emerged from the bottom of her heart, as if falling into the boundless sea of blood. She immediately wanted to force the bead of blood out of her body. But as soon as she thought of it, the feeling of the bead of blood completely disappeared. Even the desire for blood dissipated. It seemed that it was suppressed by something and didn't show up. Seeing this scene, Lin Yanxing immediately became crazier. He shouted inarticulately and repeated it many times before Su Li could understand the meaning. Impossible. I'm his successor. How could it choose you? Impossible. Old guy, you lied to me. Sitting quietly in the room, Su Li touched the position of her heart. Her eyes were gloomy. Was the old guy mentioned by Lin Yanxing the old beggar? Most of the day had passed, but the bead of blood had no reaction. Was it related to the black ring? Or there was something strange in her body that she didn't notice at all? Well, it's useless to think too much. Chapter 285. In the evening, Ling Li and Ling Qinglan finally came back from the palace. Behind them, there was a team of guards carrying boxes. It was obviously the gold, silver, and jewelry rewarded by Dongfang Xiao. Entering the palace to meet the emperor and getting a reward was a happy thing for the Ling family. Qiu Meng inevitably arranged a family banquet in the evening. It was quite lively. The only thing that made Qiu Meng feel regretful was that Ling Ping was still supervising the war in the frontier and couldn't come back to reunite. Aunt, don't worry. The second brother is a good man. He has been to the battlefield many times over the years, but he is still fine. Now he is the marshal. He doesn't need to fight by himself in the war. It is naturally safer. After Ling Qinglan comforted her, Qiu Meng was relieved. After the case was closed and the pressure of the Ling family was relieved, he could spare energy to pay attention to the war. Ling Mo had arrived at the frontier. Regardless of the outcome of the war, it was absolutely no problem to protect Ling Ping. At this time, Mrs. Ji Yu, who had been silent, slowly said, Qinglan, don't put too much pressure on yourself. The Ling family is not as fragile as you think. It is not a problem for me to hold on for a few more years. Mother, now our family is fine. There is no danger. What are you talking about? Qiu Meng couldn't help but say. Mrs. Ji Yu smiled and sighed in her heart. Qiu Meng. She liked this girl because she was simple-minded and wouldn't bully the honest Ling Feng. But because of this, she couldn't see the dangerous situation of the Ling family. Qinglan made such a great contribution, but Dongfang Xiao only rewarded him with some useless gold, silver, and jewelry. He didn't even mention the promotion. How could it not explain the problem? It was a pity that only Ling Ping and Ling Qinglan could see this in the Ling family. Except for the old guy, only Ling Ping and Ling Qinglan could see this. As for Ling Li, Mrs. Ji Yu glanced at Ling Power, who was still secretly flirting with Su Li. She felt helpless and nodded, well, I won't say it. In short, Qinglan, do what you can and don't take risks. I will. Ling Qinglan nodded slightly. After the conversation, the family banquet finally came to an end with a relatively relaxed tone. After the meal, everyone rested. Ling Li returned to the east courtyard. Looking at Ling Li, who looked indifferent, he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, he didn't ask anything. He just said, I will sleep in the study tonight. Then he turned the wheelchair and left. Looking at his back, Su Li's eyes gradually softened, and then mixed with a lot of unwillingness and unknown emotions. Finally, all kinds of complex feelings turned into coldness and firmness. Ling Li should be refining the elixir she gave him. Of course, she didn't prepare this elixir for herself, but for Ling Li. The elixir contained nothing else but her 500 years of cultivation. If Ling Li could absorb 50% of that pure power, not only could he break through the longevity realm, but he could also quickly reach the peak of the first hurdle of the longevity realm. The battle in Lonely Mountain was not difficult. It only took me 30 years of accumulation, and the other 20 years of accumulation were all wasted on the road. Su Li sat in front of the dressing table and quietly looked at the person in the mirror. To be exact, she was looking at the new red jade and gold hairpin on her head. Ling Li secretly gave it to her at the family dinner just now. 50 years of accumulation isn't a lot to make a move once. Su Li took off the hairpin on her head and gently rubbed it, The consumption of accumulation after sealing my cultivation is less than I thought. But can I really accompany him like this all the time? Really, can I? Suddenly, the window of the side door of the wing room was suddenly opened, and a figure quietly appeared behind Su Li. He said respectfully, "Highly great master." Su Li slowly turned around and saw the person. It was Chu Xiao. She nodded expressionlessly. "Did Jingxin ask you to come? And why do you call me highly great master?" Chu Xiao didn't dare to be disrespectful. He bent down and presented a square wooden box with both hands, and then said, "Highly great master has announced that you are the master, and the 12 heads of the spiritual realm dare not disobey. Now the spiritual realm is gathering troops and waiting for your order at any time." Su Li took the wooden box, but didn't open it immediately. Instead, she said, "Jingxin is Jingxin, and I am me. If you don't agree, you can tell me. You don't have to compromise." Chu Xiao was immediately frightened and said, "Highly great master, you misunderstood me. We 12 heads of the spiritual realm are willing to go through fire and water for you. We don't feel wronged at all. Highly great master, please understand." Su Li frowned slightly. She didn't understand why Chu Xiao was so loyal to the spiritual realm. But it was good. "You go outside and guard. Don't be found by the people in the mansion. If there is any trouble, remind me immediately." "Yes." After Chu Xiao left, Su Li opened the wooden box. Immediately, a light flew out from the gap and turned into an illusory figure. It was Jingxin. Sub-awareness. This was a sub-awareness. This word naturally crossed Su Li's mind. She wanted to recall more deeply, but found that it was a blank, and she couldn't remember more. Fortunately, at this time, Jingxin explained, "Master, this time the spiritual body sent by the outside world is very powerful. I can't fight with it. After many days, I found a gap and separated a consciousness from the body. Although it doesn't have any fighting capacity and can't last for a long time, it is enough to communicate with you." As she said, she pointed to the transparent master in the wooden box. "This is the soul-sealing pearl. The original soul of my Ruahan is in it. After dealing with the spiritual body, I personally went to explore it. I found that an incredible change happened to my Ruahan. She had 2 souls in her body. One soul belongs to the body, and the other one was produced when she entered the reincarnation mirror." "What do you mean?" Su Li frowned. She hadn't recovered her memory, so she couldn't understand Jingxin's words at all. Jingxin had no choice but to continue to explain patiently, "Master, no matter a practitioner or an ordinary person, there can only be one soul in a physical body. There is no doubt about it." Su Li understood and her eyes flickered slightly. "So, after my Ruahan's new soul woke up and had its own consciousness, it stimulated the original soul and woke it up?" "Yes." Jingxin was full of regret. When the old soul woke up, it naturally recovered all the original memory, so it tricked you to break the ring. Unfortunately, the spiritual body in the outside world suddenly lost its mind and went crazy. At that time, in order not to offend those sects in the outside world, it took me a lot of effort to suppress it. Now I think it was all their conspiracy to distract my attention. If I had noticed it earlier, maybe you... Forget it. Don't mention the things that have happened." Su Li waved her hand to stop Jingxin from continuing. She fixed her eyes on the soul-sealing pearl for a long time and suddenly said, "Jingxin, since you are the mirror spirit of the reincarnation mirror, the illusion should also be under your control. Can you directly destroy the royal family of the Dahan country?" Jingxin smiled bitterly. "Master, you think too highly of me. Not to mention that I am not the real mirror spirit of the reincarnation mirror. The Dongfang family is not as simple as you think. They have a very close relationship with Xiaoshan Palace." "Xiaoshan Palace?" Su Li was slightly confused, and her face changed immediately. She blurted out, "The overlord sect of the spiritual circle, Xiaoshan Palace?" "Master, you are right. It is that Xiaoshan Palace. The history of Xiaoshan Palace is very long. It is said that there is an old ancestor of the divine realm in the palace. Even I may not be their opponent." Su Li held her breath. The divine realm. She had never heard of this word. It must be the realm above the longevity realm. There were 9 hurdles in the longevity realm, and the difference in strength of each hurdle couldn't be calculated. But the old ancestor of Xiaoshan Palace actually surpassed the longevity realm? There is one more point. I have long wanted to tell you, but I didn't have enough time last time. So, I can explain to you face to face now. Su Li nodded to show her understanding. It's not too late to say it now. Jing Xin showed a helpless expression. I told you last time that I had no choice but to sacrifice myself to enter the reincarnation mirror. Although it was a blessing in disguise and I became a mirror spirit with an endless life, I knew that there was an extremely horrible existence sleeping in the reincarnation mirror the moment I became a mirror spirit. That existence is the real mirror spirit. I may just be an agent chosen by it unconsciously. Su Li was slightly shocked. Jing Xin was just an agent. No wonder she couldn't completely control this treasure. Master, the illusion you are in is actually not a complete illusion. Strictly speaking, there are 3 kinds of people living in the illusion now. 3 kinds. Su Li was slightly stunned. In addition to the group of outsiders, there were actually 2 kinds of people. Jing Xin nodded cautiously. The first kind is an outsider like you, who just entered in the last 100 years. The second kind is the intelligence that is born from the illusion. Take Chu Xiao as an example. Strictly speaking, they are not human beings. Su Li glanced at Chu Xiao, who was still waiting respectfully outside the door. He didn't look like other species. Because the existence like Chu Xiao is transformed by the illusion, so as long as the illusion exists, they can get eternal life. Even if they are killed, it will take some time to condense again. However, the recondensed wisdom will not have the original memory, which is convenient for me to brainwash and control. At this point, Su Li finally understood where Chu Xiao's loyalty came from. A blank piece of paper was the easiest to brainwash. What about the third kind of people? Su Li asked again. Jing Xin's face instantly became serious, and her tone became low. The last type is the ancient existences that were trapped in this illusory realm a very, very long time ago. Even though they're trapped, they aren't controlled by the illusory realm of reincarnation. No matter how many lives the illusory realm reincarnates, they're able to transcend it and live freely without revealing themselves. Su Li was slightly nervous, and immediately thought of the old beggar. The illusion that she felt from him couldn't integrate into the world was exactly what Jing Xin said. My ability is limited. I don't know how many of those existences are in the illusion and how powerful they are. The only one I can find out is the old ancestor of the Xiaoshan Palace. Jing Xin shook her head and said. Her figure became blurred and soon dissipated. But this time, she was obviously not in a hurry. She had said what she should say, and the rest was up to her master. Master, I left a secret method in the wooden box. If you can master it, maybe. Chapter 286. The night was still quiet. After Chu Xiao left, Su Li sat back in front of the table and picked up a secret method in the wooden box to read it carefully. After the ring was broken, her comprehension was not the same as before. Only after an hour, she had a kind of enlightenment in her heart. This was the secret method to control the power of illusion. If she could master it, she could at least use the power of illusion to raise her strength to another level. Maybe, after I master it, I can fight against the old ancestor of Shenxiao Palace, Su Li muttered to herself. She could guess the content of Jing Xin's words after she understood the secret method. But on the contrary, using the secret method to improve strength in a short time consumed a lot of foundation. If she was right, she still had more than 9,000 foundation, but how many times could she fight if she really broke out her strongest fighting power? Taking a breath, Su Li slowly immersed herself in the understanding. Even if she could only fight once, she would not hesitate when it was really necessary. After many days, Su Li concentrated on practicing the secret method, and Ling Li also tried his best to absorb the efficacy of elixirs. Finally, on the 8th day, an extremely horrible pneuma rose in the study of the east courtyard, which was covered by the tactical matrix. It almost broke through the tactical matrix and rushed to the sky. Su Li, who was in the wing room, sensed it. She immediately stretched out her hand and pressed in the air. The pneuma that was about to break through the tactical matrix immediately disappeared. Only 8 days. It's much faster. Su Li smiled slightly. Ling Li's talent was better than she thought. He was so talented in the illusion. What about the original him? Thinking of this, Su Li's eyes dimmed slightly, and she meditated again. At this moment, the commotion in the study gradually became smaller and finally disappeared into nothingness. Looking at the files in the room that were in a mess because of the impact of the spiritual power, Ling Li shook his head and smiled bitterly. But he was happy in his heart. He stayed at the peak of the inborn realm for a year, and he finally broke through to the longevity realm. As long as the news was passed to the elders of the cult, he could immediately control all the power of the Enmore cult. In this way, even if the Dongfang family really fell out with the Ling family, I will not be afraid. Ling Li clenched his fists. After stabilizing his mind, he sat down again to consolidate the realm that he had just broken through. If the power leaked and was exposed in advance, the loss outweighed the gain. The next morning, Ling Qinglan came in a hurry. When he saw Ling Li with a smile, he faintly felt something different. Then he suddenly thought of something. He was stunned and said with great joy, "Have you broken through?" Ling Li nodded with a smile. "Great." Ling Qinglan was refreshed, and then his face darkened. He said hurriedly, "Let's not talk about this first. Something happened in the battlefield of Nanjiang border. Second brother fell into the trap of Nanjiang country and disappeared. Ling Mo also disappeared." "What?" Ling Li's face changed slightly. He waved his hand and the mechanism of the study was activated. The tunnel appeared. According to Ling Mo's temperament, if he successfully got out of trouble, there would be some news. "There's no time to lose, I'll set off immediately. Help me cover up my mother and Su Li." Ling Li hesitated for a moment and said, "Just say that I am going out to do something and will be back soon." Ling Qinglan nodded. After Ling Li left, he was slightly relieved. Ling Li was already in the longevity realm. The ordinary army could not be his opponent. There were only a few people in the longevity realm in the secular world. As long as Ling Li could arrive in time, the crisis would definitely be resolved. Ling Qinglan tidied up the study and went out to the wing room. He knocked on the door for a long time, but no one answered. He scanned the room with his psychic awareness and found that there was no one in the room. Where can Su Li go in the morning? Ling Li was confused and was about to open the door directly. Mammy Li suddenly appeared with a note in her hand and handed it to him. "Master Qinglan, Miss asked me to give this to you." Ling Qinglan took the note and opened it quickly. After reading it, he smiled helplessly. "Well, it's easy to make up a reason after Su Li leaves." The handwriting on the note was very sloppy, and there was only one line. It could be seen that the owner wrote it in a hurry. "Don't worry about leaving for a few days." Crack. Ling Qinglan crushed the note and turned to leave. He had to think of a better reason to tell Chiu Meng that Su Li disappeared not long after Ling Li left. If there was no explanation, he would not believe it. However, it's good for Su Li to follow him. With her medical skills, she can help a lot on the battlefield. Ling Li is obsessed with getting into a dead end. I didn't expect that Su Li's idea was really broken by him. 7 days later, outside the Dahan Pass. The land was purple, the grass and trees were red, and everything was withering. Sporadic fires of war could be seen everywhere. Broken fences, broken walls, and mountains of corpses could be seen. There was even a faint blood mist in some places where the war had just ended. Suddenly, a white figure flitted across the battlefield like a ghost. When the edge of the battlefield was about to enter the withered forest, the white light dissipated, and a white figure appeared. It was Ling Li who wore the mask of Child Li. According to Ling Qinglan's information, the last place where the second brother was attacked is here. Ling Li frowned and reached out to brush the air. He turned his palm, and there was a cloud of strange white smoke slowly rolling. Smoke miasma. It's the method of the Hehuan sect. Is it possible that the ambush is not from the Nanjiang country, but from the Hehuan sect? But why does the Hehuan sect attack the second brother? There is no reason. With a trace of doubt, Ling Li stepped into the withered forest. If he was in the inborn realm, he would be afraid of it. Now, even if he breathed freely, he would not be affected at all. At the same time, a faint light suddenly burst out in a very inconspicuous cave in the depths of the withered forest, which isolated the bloody smell from the outside world. The lieutenant who put the last tactical flag finally couldn't hold it anymore. He directly collapsed on the ground and gasped heavily. He said reluctantly, "General, the tactical matrix has been set up. We are safe for the time being." Glancing at the lieutenant who was covered with scars, Ling Ping nodded gently and ordered him to meditate and heal. He glanced at the other lieutenants who escaped with him, and finally turned his eyes to Ling Mo, who was in a coma. At this moment, Ling Mo's black clothes were tattered and bloodstained. There was no good flesh on his body. In particular, his right elbow and left thigh seemed to be cut off by a sharp weapon. The white bone was exposed, which was shocking. His breathing was even more undetectable. If Ling Ping didn't have good hearing, he would even think that he was dead. Ling Ping barely checked Ling Mo's heart pulse and found that it was neither weakened nor strengthened. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He had used all the medicines that could be used on Ling Mo. Whether Ling Mo could survive or not depended on fate. "It turns out that you have always protected me." Ling Ping's eyes were complicated. He slowly breathed out, as if he wanted to spit out all kinds of thoughts in his mind. The battle 7 days ago was the final battle that determined the outcome of this war. No matter in terms of military strength or intelligence control, he was above the Nanjiang country. There was no reason for him to be defeated. Sure enough, after a fierce battle, the Nanjiang country was defeated. Even the enemy's marshal abandoned the camp and fled. Ling Ping made up his mind to catch the king. Naturally, he couldn't let him escape. He immediately chased after him with his elite troops. So, they came to the withered forest. Of course, he understood the principle of not entering the forest. At that time, he wanted to retreat with his people. But he didn't expect that the ambush was set outside the withered forest, and there were only 4 people in the ambush. But these 4 people killed Ling Ping's elite troops. They were not their opponents at all. The peak of the inborn realm. The 4 killers were all at the peak of the inborn realm. Ling Ping himself had the cultivation of the inborn second hurdle. He had seen the existence of the peak of the inborn realm, an old man beside Dongfang Xiao. In front of him, he felt the same pneuma. Despair. Which martial artist at the peak of the innate realm wasn't a big shot in their own right? He never thought that one day, 4 people at the peak of the inborn realm would take action to kill him. Just at the moment when he was about to give up, another sword light suddenly lit up in the forest. The sword light was really amazing and beautiful. The angle was perfect and impeccable. It didn't give people any time to react. Even the people at the peak of the inborn realm were seriously injured and lost the ability to fight for a short time. Then, 2 more figures appeared in the forest. The 3 figures immediately fought with the remaining 3 people at the peak of the inborn realm. In an instant, the sky was full of knives and swords. Unfortunately, the cultivation of the other 2 black figures was poor after all. They would soon be defeated. Ling Ping wanted to help, but he also knew that he would only make trouble in the battle of that level. Just when Ling Ping tried to see the situation clearly, the 2 figures suddenly stopped, and then there was only white light in front of them. Boom! Boom! An explosion sounded in his ears. Accompanied by the hoarse voice of the 6 shirts, the battle came to an end in an extremely tragic manner. The 2 people in the black shadows had actually risked their lives to self-destruct and forcefully perished together with the 4 peak innate realm experts. That was the self-explosion of 2 inborn seniors. Inborn seniors cherished their lives very much. Ling Ping was very clear that the 2 people didn't explode themselves for him, but for the man in black who had lost consciousness and ran away. Thinking of this, he was more and more curious about the identity of the man in black. He always wanted to know who protected him secretly, but he also knew that it was not safe at that time. When he came to this cave, he knew the true face of the man in black. It was Ling Mo, who had always been with the 3rd brother. Ling Mo actually had the cultivation to fight with the people at the peak of the inborn realm. He hid so deeply in the Ling family. Was it for repaying the 3rd brother's kindness? Or all this was arranged by the 3rd brother. 3rd brother, if I can go back alive. Ling Ping took a deep breath and barely suppressed the throbbing in his heart. He sat down and ran the genuine energy to heal himself. Suddenly, Ling Ping noticed something wrong. He suddenly opened his eyes and was shocked to find that Ling Mo actually sat up by himself and was healing himself. With such an injury, could he wake up by himself? How strong his willpower was! At least, it was completely impossible for him. It seemed that Ling Mo sensed Ling Ping's sight. He opened his eyes with difficulty and said in a hoarse voice, "Master, it's coming." Ling Ping held his breath and said, "What did you say?" "Third brother, what could a disabled man do on the battlefield?" Chapter 287. Is it possible that he has other powerful helpers like you in secret and brought him here? How can his body stand it? Ling Ping frowned and asked, but Ling Mo was completely focused on healing and didn't respond. In desperation, Ling Ping could only temporarily suppress his messy thoughts and wait for Ling Mo to stabilize his injury. Just 2 days after Ling Li entered the withered forest, Su Li finally arrived at the border. It was a long journey, and Ling Li had rushed to the rescue in advance. Of course, she would not be so extravagant as to use her foundation to hurry. On the way, she used a spirit horse sent from the spiritual realm. Although it looked similar to ordinary horses, its speed was much faster than ordinary horses. It was 3 times faster than ordinary horses, so she could reach the border in just a few days. The spiritual realm was all over the illusion. As soon as Su Li arrived, someone appeared to take the horse and feed it. At the same time, a middle-aged executive wearing the symbolic clothes of the spiritual realm came forward respectfully. "Greetings, Lord. I'm Ching Sen." Su Li looked very young, even young. Ching Sen was old enough to be her uncle, but his age obviously didn't affect his respect for Su Li. He remembered the strict instructions of the great head of the spiritual realm and didn't dare to neglect. This was a person whose status was comparable to that of highly great master. If he didn't serve her well, he would definitely end up miserably. How is the situation in the border? Where is Ling Ping now? Su Li didn't beat around the bush and asked directly. Ching Sen's heart skipped a beat. He immediately replied, "Sir, since the order was passed to me, I immediately started to investigate. Half a month ago, General Ling Ping was ambushed by the Hehuan sect. After a battle, he was forced into the depths of the withered forest. I have marked the places where people might hide and sent people to explore. But the Hehuan sect and the royal family of Nanjiang country seemed to be determined to kill Ling Ping. Most of the warriors in the withered forest were warriors of the inborn realm sent by them." Speaking of this, Ching Sen looked ashamed. Su Li reached the longevity realm and knew that what Ching Sen said was true. She immediately waved her sleeves and said, "The 2 sects united. This is just a separate building. It's reasonable that you can't defeat them. Next, you don't need to send a lot of people into the withered forest. I will personally solve the problem. What you have to do next is to find out the relationship between the royal family of Nanjiang country and the Hehuan sect. What was it that caused these 2 families to unite? If she didn't figure it out, she wouldn't be able to rest easy. This subordinate will do it right away." Ching Sen bowed and immediately took people to execute the order. With the eyes of the spiritual realm all over the dreamland, what kind of news couldn't he get? The only variable that could be considered as a variable was the length of time. After Ching Sen left, no one else could be seen outside the withered forest. Su Li put away the map in her hand and glanced at the lonely woods. She triggered the mask in her body and faintly sensed the existence of the young jade bone. She immediately chased after it. After running for half a day, Ling Li's figure finally appeared in Su Li's psychic awareness. She secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Ling Li had been wearing the mask on his face. If it was in his body, she would not be able to sense it. Ling Li, who was walking in the forest, stopped and looked more cautious. Although the peeping just came and went quickly, it did not prevent him from perceiving its existence. Do the seniors of the Hehuan sect arrive so soon? Ling Li frowned slightly, but the second brother's whereabouts have not been found. In the past 2 days, he had encountered no less than 4 groups of warriors of the Hehuan sect and the Nanjiang country. Although he killed them as soon as he met them, and the delay time was less than 5 minutes, it was difficult to ensure that the news had been leaked. The name Child Li was very deterrent, but he had many enemies, especially here was very close to the territory of the Lianxia cult. At this moment, phew. An extremely slight sound of breaking through the air sounded behind him. Ling Li squinted his eyes and immediately turned around to grab the hidden weapon. He didn't stop at all and rushed to the direction where the hidden weapon came from. But he didn't see the slightest figure. A senior is definitely above the longevity realm. His ability to hide his breath is very powerful. Ling Li judged the strength of the person and felt a little helpless. He just broke through the longevity realm not long ago. Maybe he could fight with others in terms of strength, but his body movement was still in the inborn realm. What is this? Ling Li had to turn his attention to the hidden weapon in his hand when he lost the trace of the enemy. Then he knew that the hidden weapon was not a hidden weapon at all, but a map made of very tough beast fur. What is drawn on the map is the withered forest. Ling Li was slightly shocked. The withered forest covered an area of more than 10,000 miles. Unexpectedly, there was a force that could draw such a detailed map. It was definitely not a overnight work. That person is not an enemy, but wants to give me a map. Thinking it through, Ling Li opened the map and looked at it carefully. Finally, he found the places that were marked. Is he helping me or setting a trap? Ling Li frowned tightly. A mysterious longevity realm suddenly appeared, gave him a map and left without saying a word. It was strange in any way. Well, let's go to the nearest place to have a look. Ling Li gritted his teeth and left. Now the second brother's life was uncertain. The situation was critical and he couldn't continue to delay. After Su Li gave the map to Ling Li, she returned to the spiritual realm and quickly led the spirit beast horse on the road again. This time, the direction was Nanjiang country. This trip was her decision after careful consideration. Ling Ping's matter happened suddenly. She just happened to meet him. Therefore, she chose not to show up and let Ling Li solve it by himself. Qing Sen had investigated clearly that there was no longevity realm on the border now. Of course, Ling Li's safety was not a problem. Su Li's clothes had been changed into the style of Nanjiang country. In addition, there were people of the spiritual realm to help her. 2 days later, she entered the territory of Nanjiang country without any difficulty. Only a few people knew Su Li's identity in the spiritual realm. Among them, Xian He, the head of the spiritual realm of Nanjiang country, was one of them. 6 days later, when she just set foot on the land of the capital of Nanjiang country, Xian He came to pick her up with people. After Su Li was placed in a luxurious yard, Xian He and Su Li were alone. He immediately knelt down and saluted, "Highly great master, I'm Xian He." Su Li responded calmly and said lightly, "You don't need to salute. I think Qing Sen has sent a message to you. How is the investigation going?" Xian He got up and immediately replied, "Nanjiang country and the Hehuan sect did collude together, but their original purpose was to deal with the Lianxia cult, not Ling Ping of the Ling family." Su Li raised her eyebrows slightly and said, "What do you mean? Tell me in detail." "It is related to the auction in Yunjing, the capital of Dahan country, last year." Obviously, Xian He had done enough homework in the past 2 days. He almost knew the whole story. At that time, there should be a manipulator in Yunjing city. Almost all the foreign forces who went to Yunjing city for the auction suffered extremely heavy blows. I thought it was the Dongfang family who did it, but later I found that it was not. Well, skip this part and get to the point. Su Li interrupted him mercilessly. She was the initiator of the Great Purge. How could it be explained in detail by others? A trace of embarrassment flashed on Xian He's face and he continued, "Just half a month ago, the Lianxia cult released a very amazing news. The daughter of the lord of the Lianxia cult practiced the selfless corpse heart and almost perfectly inherited the most important practice method of the Lianxia cult. Her combat power was amazing. She could fight with a practitioner of the longevity realm at the peak of the inborn realm without being at a disadvantage. How could a practitioner of the inborn realm fight with a practitioner of the longevity realm without being at a disadvantage?" Su Li looked calm, but she couldn't help but feel horrified. Even she had never had this kind of combat power with a higher rank. Otherwise, She would not be forced into a desperate situation by an elder of the Enmore cult in the rain that day. However, after hearing this, Su Li had faintly understood that the Lianxia cult probably bid for the full moon and heartstrings for the proud girl. Unfortunately, the full moon and heartstrings had been replaced by her. If there was no accident at this time, Xianhe sighed, I didn't expect that the young lord of the Lianxia cult was too anxious to refine the full moon and heartstrings. He exploded and died directly. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly and didn't say much. Seeing that her reaction was indifferent, Xianhe immediately put away the thought of seeing her reaction and continued to say honestly, the lord of the Lianxia cult was old, and there was no successor in the cult. Now the sudden death of the young lord meant that the Lianxia cult had no way out. So, the lord of the Lianxia cult took a risky move and directly attacked the Nanjiang country. Su Li nodded slightly. There was no room for two tigers in the same mountain. The Wei family of the Nanjiang country and the Lianxia cult were like the Dongfang family of the Dahan royal family and the Enmore cult. One of them would inevitably decide the winner to control the country. The Wei family started a civil strife and sat on the throne for only a few years. The strength of the Wei family had not fully recovered. If they fought with the Lianxia cult at this time, they would definitely be badly hurt. So, they chose to cooperate with the Hehuan sect. Su Li took over the topic and said slowly. Xianhe couldn't help but nod. Exactly. But the lord of the Lianxia cult was not a fool. He realized that the Wei family invited an ally. Although he hated them, he could only choose to give in. Speaking of this, Xianhe smiled bitterly. The lord of the Lianxia cult was really courageous. He directly abandoned the sect and hid in the mystery forbidden area. The mystery forbidden area was not dangerous, but even a practitioner of the longevity realm would get lost in it. It was very likely that he couldn't come out in his lifetime. The Wei family and the Hehuan sect couldn't be crazy with him. Of course, they couldn't bring people to chase him. Hearing this, Su Li had fully understood that Ling Ping suffered an unexpected disaster. When the two forces cooperated, they were eager to fight, but they directly lost their target. They could only find another opponent to kill and stabilize the cooperation. At this time, Ling Ping, the marshal of the Dahan country, happened to be at the border of the Nanjiang country. It could be said that he was the most important person that they could immediately target at that time. Does the Nanjiang country want to fight with the Dahan country? Su Li was silent, and a cold light flashed in her eyes from time to time. Chapter 288. Is there a suitable candidate for the family I asked you to find? Thinking of this, Su Li said decisively with her eyes shining. Xianhe was shocked and bowed his head. Highly great master, I dare not neglect your order. There is indeed a suitable candidate at present, but what? Can that family be stronger than the spiritual realm? Su Li's eyes were cold, and Xianhe immediately sweated on his forehead. He said, No. Although the Lu family has some strength, it is not much stronger than an ant in front of the spiritual realm. Is there any problem? Su Li's words were decisive, and Xianhe could only nod helplessly. At the same time, he also understood that the new highly great master was not a transcendent and gentle woman like Great Master Jingxin, but a more decisive existence than a man. Well, get ready, and then we will go to the Lu family. Speaking of this, Su Li paused. By the way, have the people I arranged for you arrived? Hearing Su Li's words, Xianhe finally showed a smile on his face. Child Fang Yuan and others have arrived 2 days ago, and they are resting in the branch building. Although the spiritual circle was the home of the Xiaoshan Palace, the spiritual realm had eyes and ears all over the illusion. It was not difficult to find Fang Yuan and others. That's good. Let's go and meet them. Su Li waved her hand and took the lead, and Xianhe followed closely. Perhaps even Su Li herself did not find that her demeanor and behavior at the moment were more unpredictable than that of the female devil in the previous life. That was from the soul and the nobility of life level. The spiritual realm of the Nanjiang country was the same as that of the Dahan country. Led by Xianhe, Su Li came to the guest room and soon met Fang Yuan, Chu Qingning, and Fang Mu, whom she had not seen for more than half a year. In addition, Su Li specially asked Chu Xiao to send Yin Xuetong here. In this way, all the people related to the Nanjiang country were here. Su Li, what's the matter? Are you also caught by them? Chu Qingning looked surprised and doubtful. They were forcibly brought by the people of the spiritual realm and could not resist at all. Now Su Li also appeared here, so they had to think about the worst. Before Su Li spoke, Xian He couldn't help but say, Child Chu, you must be joking. We are all servants of highly great master. How can we be disrespectful to highly great master? As soon as Xian He spoke, the four people in the room were shocked. Even Fang Yuan's face changed. He was caught by Xian He himself. With his current cultivation, he couldn't resist at all. It was as easy as an eagle catching a chick. Such a powerful existence was absolutely a senior in the longevity realm, but he actually obeyed Su Li? She was not a member of the Wanjian sect. How could Su Li hide such a terrible power? Alright, there's no need to say any more. You can leave first. Su Li frowned, and Xian He realized that he had flattered the wrong person. He could only smile bitterly in secret, saluted and nodded to leave. He moved cautiously and did not forget to gently close the door before leaving. He was as humble as dust. As soon as Xian He left, the atmosphere in the room became much more relaxed. Su Li, it is you who brought us here from the spiritual circle? That middle-aged man's cultivation is extremely terrible. How did you? Chu Qingning asked impatiently. Although he was caught along the way, he inquired about the news every day after realizing that those people were only under house arrest. However, he didn't know where it was. Everyone was very tight-lipped, which almost made him suffocated. Well, I'm lucky to control a small force, which is much more convenient for me to do things. Su Li replied briefly, which finally saved Chu Qingning from suffocation. Hearing this understatement, Fang Yuan, who had some speculation, couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Was the spiritual realm a small force? The experience in the spiritual circle for more than half a year had made him fully understand the terrible background of the spiritual realm. It was definitely a giant at the same level as the Xiaoshan Palace, or a higher level. But today Su Li said, the spiritual realm was already hers. Su Li glanced at Fang Yuan and didn't say much. Then she said, in short, this encounter is beneficial to me. Now that I have enough strength, I decide to complete the agreement with you first. Agreement? It was such a distant word that the four people who heard this sentence were stunned for a while. Then their faces changed dramatically. Su Li, do you want to destroy the royal family of Nanjiang country? Yin Xuetong opened her beautiful eyes wide and asked incredulously. Was it possible that the Wanjian sect was used by Su Li? In her opinion, she naturally couldn't think of how terrible the so-called small force was, so she immediately had a slight misunderstanding. Su Li didn't explain, but just nodded and said, yes, you come with me to the Lu family tonight. The Lu family of the four families? Haven't they been exterminated and survived until now? Chu Qingning blurted out in shock. Do you know the Lu family? Su Li raised her eyebrows. She didn't ask about the information about the Lu family in detail, because she only needed a springboard to enter the palace. But judging from Chu Qingning's appearance, the Lu family seemed to be very complicated. I know more about the Lu family. Fang Mu, who had been following Fang Yuan as an obedient follower, suddenly said cautiously, the four families of Nanjiang country are the Fang family, the Chu family, the Yin family, and the Lu family. It's not difficult for Sister Su to guess something, right? Su Li's eyes showed a hint of understanding, and she nodded and said, I see. You are from the other three families of the four families. Sister Su is right. I was just a collateral disciple of the Fang family at that time, but I have a good friend who is a disciple of the Lu family, so I am familiar with the Lu family. Fang Mu frowned and said, but the strength of the Lu family is not strong on the surface, which is equal to that of the Fang family. How did they persist for so long under the suppression of the Wei family? It had been several years since the destruction of the other three families. The Lu family was absolutely abnormal. Anyway, the Lu family is already an arrow at the end of its flight. Otherwise, Xian He will not choose it as a springboard. You all prepare to visit with me in the evening. Su Li gave an order, and everyone nodded gently. Fang Yuan secretly remembered the name Su Li said. The middle-aged man turned out to be Xian He. Time quickly approached the night. In Tiangu City, the capital of Nanjiang Country, there was a house of thousands of hectares in the south of the city. The house was brightly lit. Eldest brother, second brother, do you still want to persist until now? If you are still stubborn, we will end up like the Fang, Yin, and Chu families. In the main hall of the vestibule, there were 3 middle-aged men who were frowning. The faces of the 3 were faintly similar. It was not difficult to see that they were brothers. The one who spoke was the youngest middle-aged man, about 30 years old. Although he was dressed in beautiful clothes and wore a jade crown, his face was full of anxiety. It seemed that he was trying hard to persuade. He was the third master of the Lu family, Lu Jiang. Third brother, it's not that I don't want to give in, but now our Lu family has no ability to give in. The haggard man sitting in the first seat said helplessly. These years of struggling to maintain the family had made strands of white hair appear in his black hair, which made him look more like a man in his 60s. Lu Jiang was stunned, and his face immediately became pale at a speed visible to the naked eye. Eldest brother, our family's poisonous life-bound king? Third brother, don't say it. Your eldest brother has tried his best and even fed the poisonous life-bound king with his own blood essence. Unfortunately, after the death of the highest elder, our family can no longer find anyone who can match the poisonous life-bound king, and we can't get the blood essence of the practitioners of the longevity realm. As early as half a month ago, the poisonous life-bound king has starved to death. Lu He, the second master, sighed deeply and finally chose to confess to his third brother. If he continued to hide it, it was hard to guarantee that Lu Jiang would not do anything. Dead, actually dead. Lu Jiang's eyes were dull. He muttered a few words, and his expression suddenly became crazy and he smiled bitterly. It's all your fault. If you were not selfish and didn't offer the poisonous life-bound king to the royal family, how could our Lu family fall into such a desperate situation? It's over. Everything is over. Our Lu family will be like the other 3 families. Looking at his third brother going crazy, Lu Hai closed his eyes painfully. He looked regretful, but more helpless and complicated. At that time, he relied on the power of the poisonous life-bound king to compete with the practitioners of the longevity realm. Therefore, the Lu family got a chance of survival under the pressure of the Wei family. The Wei family took a fancy to the poisonous life-bound king and was unwilling to fight for a long time, so that the Lu family could survive for so many years. But the 3 brothers all knew the drawback of the poisonous life-bound king, it was extremely difficult to feed. Every poisonous insect had a specific thing. For example, the sound acquaintance of Su Li fed on singing, while the poisonous life-bound king of the Wang family fed on the blood essence. The rank of the poisonous life-bound king was extremely high, which was enough for a senior of the inborn realm to fight with the poisonous life-bound king. Correspondingly, the requirement for the blood essence became extremely harsh. Either the bloodline of someone in the Wang family returned to the ancestors and reached a very high degree of compatibility with the poisonous life-bound king, or it had to be fed with the blood of practitioners of the longevity realm. Otherwise, no matter how powerful the poisonous insect was, it was still a bug after all. Without food, it would starve to death. I didn't expect that the poisonous life-bound king would die so suddenly. But third brother, haven't you ever thought that the Wei family's ruthlessness will not change the result even if we offer the poisonous life-bound king to them? Lu He was calm and explained the serious relationship clearly, but Lu Jiang didn't listen at all. He was still muttering, "It's over." When it came to the state of mind, he was undoubtedly the worst among the 3 brothers. At this point, we can only take people to escape in advance. Fortunately, I transferred all the hopes of the family a few years ago. Even if we all die, the inheritance of the family will not be cut off. Lu Hai pulled an ugly smile on his face. Only this could bring him a little comfort. Head. Something bad happened. Someone came to the door. At this time, a gatekeeper suddenly came in to report in a hurry. Now those who could stay in the Lu family were all loyal servants. Therefore, even if he was so rude, Lu Hai didn't say anything, but stood up directly. His body shook, and the bitterness on his face disappeared. He showed the dignity that the head of the family should have, and said loudly, "Who is visiting at night? It's not convenient for our Lu family to see guests now. Please go back." Chapter 289. While talking, Chu Qingning walked into the gate with a smile, with his head held high and chest out, followed by Su Li and others. As for the people of the spiritual realm, they were not Xian He, but Qing Sen, the executive. Looking at a group of young boys and girls with extraordinary temperament who suddenly came uninvited, Lu Hai was slightly stunned. He recalled the young talents of the forces in Tiangu City, but found that none of them was the right one. People from other countries? Lu Hai frowned slightly and was about to ask about their origin. Lu He, the second master, stood up in surprise and doubt. He said with a faint tone of disbelief, "You are Chu Qingning, the young lord of the Chu family?" Chu Qingning smiled calmly. "It seems that second Uncle Lu has a good memory. It's really you. You were sent to the frontier, but you didn't die." Lu He looked up and down at Chu Qingning, and soon he was shocked to find that he couldn't see through Chu Qingning's cultivation. "Nephew Qingning," Jiang Hai came back to his senses and frowned, "You are too reckless. Since you have already escaped, why come back? Although the Wei family has been at war for the past few years, their strength is still much stronger than before. You are alone. Even if you add my Lu family, it will not change anything. Uncle Lu, you are wrong." Chu Qingning stepped aside and revealed the faces of the people behind him. "I am not the only one who came back." Seeing several people behind Chu Qingning, Lu Hai suddenly widened his eyes. "You, the young lord of the Fang family, the pearl of the Yin family, you are all alive and gathered together." At this moment, Lu Jiang, who had been desperate, also calmed down. He looked at Chu Qingning and others, and a glimmer of hope rose in his eyes. If the young lords of the three families still had the remaining hidden forces of their families, even the Wei family would not dare to despise them when they gathered together. No wonder they dared to come back. "Well, Qingning, let's get down to business." At this time, Su Li suddenly spoke. Although her tone was indifferent, her crisp and sweet voice made the three people of the Lu family frown at the same time. This woman seemed to be younger than Chu Qingning and others, but from her tone, she was actually the leader. Could it be that the young masters of the three clans had all defected to the new forces? Lu Hai was alarmed and uncertain in his heart. His tone towards the three young masters was extremely polite, because they did not seem to be a threat. Back then, not only was the relationship between the four great clans not close, they were even suspicious of each other. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been so easily defeated by the Wei family. Hearing Su Li's order, Chu Qingning didn't dare to continue to smile. He said seriously, "Today, we are here to ask for your help." "What kind of help?" "Bring us into the palace," Chu Qingning said firmly, and Lu Hai almost thought that he had heard it wrong. "Enter the palace? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. I don't care which faction you belong to. My Lu clan is just a small clan. We can't afford to be tossed around. There's no way I'll go to a place as dangerous as the Imperial Palace." Lu Hai's reaction was extremely intense. It was already good enough that the Wei family did not invite them to the palace. How could there be a saying that they were courting death? Su Li's expression didn't change at all. His reaction was reasonable. Just as she was about to speak, Qing Sen, who had been observing her, came up and said respectfully, "Lord, let me say it." Su Li raised her eyebrows and immediately nodded slightly. Since someone did it for her, why should she waste her saliva? "Lord." When Lu He heard this title, his heart tightened. In terms of cultivation, he was the highest in the Lu family. He was at the peak of the inborn 8th hurdle. He could see that Qing Sen's cultivation was only one hurdle lower than his. Such a person was enough to be an elder in the martial arts circle, but Qing Sen's words and deeds were more like a servant. Who could afford a servant in the inborn 7th hurdle? He couldn't imagine. For a moment, Lu Hi's gaze towards Su Li became extremely cautious. "Head of the Lu family, in the current situation of your Lu family, it's better to choose to cooperate with our Lord than to sit and wait for death. Our Lord is so powerful that the Wei family is not his opponent at all. But our Lord is kind and doesn't want to cause the Tiangu city to suffer because of the Wei family, So he appeared here. Qing Sen showed a gentle smile, but the next words made the three leaders of the Lu family feel cold all over, as if they had fallen into an ice cave. If I guess right, the poisonous insect king of your Lu family should have starved to death, and there is no longer any reliance to threaten the Wei family. If you don't choose to cooperate, then our lord can only make this unwise move and let your Lu family be the pathfinder first. Lu Hai didn't show any change on the surface, but he was shocked in his mind. This was the top secret of the Lu family. How could it be leaked? He glanced at the second brother and the third brother, who changed their faces. After a moment of silence, he finally showed a bitter smile on his face. Yes, we have no way back. I don't know how you want to cooperate with our Lu family. Su Li slightly raised the corner of her mouth, without a trace of anger. Tomorrow, your Lu family will take my people into the palace for the reason of offering the poisonous insect king. Don't worry about other things. Lu Hai's heart thumped. The girl seemed to be weak, but when she spoke, he knew that she was very overbearing and not easy to talk to. He pondered for a few seconds, and then slowly said, "This matter. Please allow me. I don't have so much time to waste with you, and I will go to the palace tomorrow." Su Li interrupted him, and Lu Hai's look immediately became ugly. Lu He snorted coldly, "Little girl who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. How powerful is the Wei family? You only bring an inborn 8th hurdle, and you want to force my Lu family to deal with the Wei family for you. It's simply wishful thinking. Today, I will let you see what is called strength." After that, a horrible power of the inborn 8th hurdle immediately broke out, rolling up the wind and sweeping over with a sonic boom. Qing Sen's face changed slightly, and he stood in front of Su Li. When he was about to block this move for Su Li, Fang Yuan, who had been standing silently by Su Li's side, moved. Without any movement, the sword in his hand had been unsheathed. Whiz! A stunning sword light flashed in the air. No, it couldn't be said to be one, but a total of 9 sword lights combined into one. Fang Yuan unexpectedly stabbed 9 swords at this moment. Bang! Qing Sen was shocked and stepped back a few steps. He looked at the front in amazement and saw that Fang Yuan's sword had been across Lu He's neck. The sleeve of Lu He's hand had been thin, and there was a deep sword wound on the back of his hand that could see the bone. Drops of blood flowed down from his fingertips. Fang Yuan's cultivation was so powerful that he was defeated in one move of the inborn 8th hurdle. Chu Qingning pursed his lips and muttered, "This guy is in the limelight again." Although Yin Shuatong wanted to cooperate with a smile, now the revenge was imminent, and she was not naturally open-minded like Chu Qingning. Finally, she just pulled the corner of her mouth and showed a touch of helplessness. "So far, your Lu family has only one choice." Fang Yuan looked at Lu He, who was frightened, and said coldly. Then he slowly moved the sword in his hand. Clang! The sword was sheathed. Su Li saw this scene, and her face showed a thoughtful expression, but she did not say anything. Lu He was shocked, and he sat back to his position with his legs weak. Seeing Fang Yuan return to Su Li expressionlessly, his lips trembled, but he did not know what to say. How many years had it been? Fang Yuan actually cultivated from the acquired hurdle to the inborn 9th hurdle. Even if he stayed in the practice pool of the sect all day, it would not be so fast. Phew, Lu Hai exhaled, as if he wanted to spit out all the shock just now. He looked back at Su Li again, and his eyes were quite different. Fang Yuan could be trained to the inborn 9th hurdle in just a few years. Such ability, even the Wei family could not compare with him. Maybe he could really take a gamble. You are right. Our Lu family really has no way out. So, please tell us the plan, and we can make full preparation. There is nothing to prepare. Su Li said lightly, the only thing your Lu family has to do is to take us to see the people of the Wei family. You don't need to intervene in the following war. Lu Hai smiled helplessly. Su Li obviously did not believe him and refused to disclose any information. But now that he had promised to join Su Li's camp, he could only suppress the uneasiness in his heart and nodded. After dealing with the Lu family, Su Li left quickly. The 3 brothers of the Lu family spent a whole night to forge an ordinary poisonous insect exactly the same as the poisonous insect king's corpse. Before they had time to rest for a while, Su Li arrived. This time, Su Li was not followed by Fang Yuan, but Xian He and 100 dare-to-die soldiers of the spiritual realm wearing the clothes of the Lu family's guard. Seeing such a battle, Lu Hai's pupils shrank, and the uneasiness in his heart faded a lot. The armor of the guards of the Lu family was specially made. In recent years, the Lu family had been weak, and it was impossible to make many sets. But Su Li made so many sets in just one night, which was enough to prove her magical power. In fact, after Xian He chose the family, he began to make it in a hurry. If there was only one day, even the spiritual realm could not make it. Su Li glanced at the fake poisonous insect king and made sure there was no mistake. Then she immediately ordered to set off. The team of hundreds of people marched to the imperial palace in a mighty manner, which naturally attracted the attention of the Wei family. Stop! The forbidden area of the imperial palace, no one is allowed to enter. The commander of the imperial palace shouted and stopped the team. His eyes roughly glanced behind the three brothers of the Lu family, and finally fell on Lu Hai. He sneered, "Why? Head of the Lu family brings so many people here. Do you want to rebel?" Lu Hai smiled embarrassedly and said submissively, "Of course not. I come here to present a treasure to the emperor. Please inform him. As for these guards, they are just to buy time for us to protect ourselves." Seeing that Lu Hai was so humble, the commander's expression changed slightly. Seeing the wooden box in his hand, he couldn't help but feel shocked. "Is it in your hand?" "It's the poisonous insect king." Lu Hai answered and bowed, "I have disconnected with this poisonous insect. If you don't believe me, you can check it yourself." Sure enough, the Lu family surrendered. The commander was happy. If he could get the poisonous insect king and present it to the emperor, it would be a great credit. "Head of the Lu family, thank you. I will give it to the emperor, and you don't have to enter the imperial palace to take risks. Isn't it the best of both worlds?" As he said, the commander reached out to grab the wooden box. Lu Hai's face changed slightly when he heard the words, and he quickly retracted his hand. The commander grabbed nothing, and his face immediately became gloomy. "Lu Hai, what do you mean? Don't you intend to present the treasure to the emperor at all?" Swish, swish, swish. As soon as the commander said this, the imperial guards around the imperial palace immediately drew their swords against each other, and the atmosphere suddenly became tense. Chapter 290. Commander Xiong, I come with sincerity to present the treasure to His Majesty. Lu Hai had been the head of the family for more than 10 years. At present, the situation was not good, but he still kept calm and said in a deep voice, "This is the treasure of my family. Only by giving it to His Majesty in person can I feel at ease. Otherwise, if it is replaced halfway, who can I ask for justice? And you can't afford it." Commander Xiong's face changed slightly and became a little ugly. Lu Hai didn't give him face at all, but what he said was not unreasonable. If Lu Hai really cheated him with a fake poisonous insect king, he would not only not be rewarded, but also be severely punished by His Majesty. Although Lu Hai was probably scaring him, this kind of risk he didn't need to take. Thinking of this, Commander Xiong snorted coldly and waved his right hand. The imperial guards behind him all made way for him. Then he stepped aside and said lightly, "Please, head of the Lu family." Lu Hai breathed a sigh of relief and said with a fist and palm salute, "Thank you." After that, he immediately disappeared into the palace gate with many guards behind him. Commander Xiong couldn't help but sneer, "Oh, stupid. The three brothers of the Lu family still have a low vision. They can't do anything to us." How could he not see that Lu Hai entered the palace with an ulterior purpose? But a small family that survived with the poisonous insect king also wanted to compete with the royal family. Did he really think that the Wei family would be afraid of the poisonous insect king of the longevity realm? He had seen the old ancestor of the longevity realm of the family with his own eyes. His power was much more horrible than the poisonous insect king. The royal family didn't attack the Lu family just because they were no longer a threat. Now that the Lu family came to die and sent a poisonous insect king, there was no reason to reject them. Under the care of Commander Xiong, Lu Hai and his party entered the palace without any hindrance and went all the way to the palace hall. The middle-aged man with a square face on the throne in the hall wore a yellow robe. He was dignified without being angry, with the elegance of a scholar. No one would think that he was the master of the Wei family, Wei Yanghong, who had stirred up a bloody storm in Nanjiang country these years. At this moment, Wei Yanghong glanced at the three brothers of the Lu family and finally fixed his eyes on Lu Hai. With a faint smile, he said, "Master of the Lu family, a wise man submits to circumstances. It is the right choice to offer the Jiyu king to me." Lu Hai's knuckles that were holding onto the box were so tight that they turned white. He did not reply, he had already completed everything here. Why was the mysterious girl still not moving? Wei Yanghong's six senses were extremely sharp. Lu Hai's hesitation immediately made him feel that something was amiss. At this time, Su Li, who was wearing the armor of the Lu family, finally said indifferently, "Do it." Before she finished her words, hundreds of men of sacrifice of spiritual realm shot out with dense killing intent. In less than 3 breaths, the 700 Imperial Army soldiers guarding the hall were all killed. The burst of aura caused Wei Yanghong's expression to change slightly. More than 100 guards of the Lu clan were all Xiantian realm cultivators. Something was amiss. Assassin. Guards. The sharp voice of the eunuch beside Wei Yanghong broke through the sky, and he himself also burst out the aura of the peak of the pre-celestial stage, blocking in front of Wei Yanghong, and chopped towards the nearest Lu Hai. How dare the Lu clan collude with outsiders? Die. The director of the imperial palace turned out to be a hidden senior. The 3 brothers of the Lu family retreated in horror. At this moment, a flash of sword light suddenly broke out from the side. So fast. Oh no. The old eunuch roared ferociously and wanted to avoid it, but the sword was so fast that he had no time to react. At the moment when he saw the sword light, the result was already doomed. The old eunuch's face immediately froze, and then a line of blood appeared on his neck. His head fell down with a thud sound. Before he made any achievement, he was beheaded by a sword. Lu Hai stared blankly at the headless body that fell on the ground, and then looked in the direction of the sword light. He happened to see Fang Yuan put away his sword. He was also at the peak of the pre-celestial stage, but he was killed by Fang Yuan, who was only 20 years old. At this time, Lu He knew that Fang Yuan's strength was much more horrible than he imagined. After killing the obstacles around Wei Yanghong, Fang Yuan stepped forward indifferently and grabbed Wei Yanghong, who was still pretending to be calm. He pulled him in front of Su Li and threw him fiercely. Lu Hai and others heard a clear crack sound, and their scalps were numb. "Who the hell are you?" Wei Yanghong endured the severe pain between his knees, looked up and glanced at Fang Yuan, Chu Qingning and others, and finally looked at Su Li. "Are you the reinforcement brought by these juniors?" Su Li smiled slightly and said, "I'm not a reinforcement. It's just a deal." "Ha!" Wei Yanghong suddenly laughed when he heard the words. "Girl, you are too young. Although I don't understand how the juniors of these 3 families persuaded you to fight against me, you must have been cheated. How can you imagine the background of my Wei family?" Su Li's face was indifferent, as if she was indifferent. Wei Yanghong saw this, but he did not stop persuading her and continued to say, "I know all the forces of Nanjiang country. You are not a citizen of Nanjiang country, so you have no grievance with my Wei family. Why do you want to get involved? If you let me go and leave with your people, I will not pursue it. But if you are still stubborn, no one can leave here today. No grievance." Su Li repeated, and her little face bloomed with a smile. "Your Majesty, let me ask you, who made the decision to cooperate with the He sect to deal with the Ling family?" Wei Yanghong's face changed in an instant. How could this woman know such a secret? Just when he was in doubt, there was a buzzing sound around the hall, and then there was a burst of fog in the hall, which wrapped the whole hall. Tactical matrix? Lu Hai and others immediately reacted and looked around at the dare-to-die soldiers of the spiritual realm who had been hidden in the fog. At this moment, they understood what Su Li wanted to do. As long as there was a tactical matrix, they would take the initiative. The Wei family could not crush them by numbers, but by strength. Well, head of the Wei family, you need to delay time, and I happen to need it too. But now the tactical matrix has been formed, so don't talk nonsense. I see that the people of your Wei family are also outside the hall. Why don't you go with me? Su Li said with a smile. Wei Yanghong only felt a chill. His purpose had already been seen through by this woman at a glance. Before he could resist, Fang Yuan had carried him to the edge of the tactical matrix outside the hall. Looking around, the square under the stone steps outside the hall was densely packed with imperial guards. Many princes and princesses came one after another, including the 6th princess, Wei Zhanzhan. Standing in the front was a white-haired old man in a black robe. When this person saw Fang Yuan carrying Wei Yanghong whose legs were broken, his face instantly became gloomy. Junior, it seems that you are not going to leave here alive. Fang Yuan smiled coldly and did not answer. Su Li glanced at the old man in a black robe and said softly, Are you Wei Hatian, the old ancestor of the Wei family? Hearing this, the old man in a black robe noticed the petite Su Li standing on one side. At this time, he noticed that both Fang Yuan and others stood at least half a body behind Su Li. The real speaker turned out to be her. The old man in a black robe was shocked, but he didn't show any strange expression on his face. He said sarcastically, You are just a silly girl. How can you be qualified to see the old ancestor of the Wei family? I am Wei Zun, the first elder of the Wei family. When Wei Zhanzhan saw Su Li, there was a touch of doubt in her eyes. After a moment, she suddenly exclaimed, Princess Li. Are you Princess Li of the Dahan country, Su Li? The old man in a black robe's face changed slightly. Did the Dongfang family even come here? Su Li glanced at Wei Zhanzhan and didn't look at her. She chuckled and said, Princess Li. I am not a member of the Dongfang family. Maybe the first elder can call me Mr. Li. Mr. Li. Are you Mr. Li? The old man in a black robe's face changed dramatically. After the auction of the Dahan country, the name was no longer limited to the Dahan country. Of course, he had heard of it. It was said that Mr. Li's medical skills were no worse than Qi Shenqing's, and his cultivation was unfathomable. But who could think that Mr. Li was actually a girl of 16 or 17 years old? Wei Yanghong, it seems that you are not important enough to draw out the old ancestor of the Wei family. Seeing that Wei Zun didn't respond for the time being, Su Li chuckled beside Wei Yanghong. Wei Yanghong looked strange, but his tone didn't change. Su Li, the first elder, is in charge of the affairs of the Wei family. His power is still above me. If you have any request, you can say it now. Request? Su Li covered her mouth and chuckled. When she was about to say something, Wei Zun, who was very close to her, suddenly moved. Swish. Under his old body, a strong force broke out. The floor tiles under his feet suddenly exploded. He turned into a residual shadow and rushed to Su Li, almost making a sonic boom in the air. At the same time, his right palm became a claw and fiercely grabbed Su Li's delicate neck. Seeing that Su Li seemed to be scared by the sudden attack and was stunned, he was happy in his heart. Since Su Li was the master, as long as he controlled Su Li, everything could be solved easily. Just at the moment when his palm was about to touch her neck, Su Li suddenly showed a strange smile on her face. Oh no, I am tricked. Wei Zun screamed in his heart. When he was about to withdraw his hand, Xian He suddenly appeared like a phantom and grabbed Wei Zun's wrist with one hand. Then a clear crack resounded through the nothingness. Wei Zun groaned and wanted to borrow the force of his palm to get away. But Xian He followed him closely like a maggot in a tarsal bone. In the blink of an eye, Xian He had hit Wei Zun 4 or 5 times. Bang! 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 Every time he was hit, Wei Zun took a step back. Until the last hit, he barely stood still, but he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. He was too strong. Wei Zun looked at Xian He, who looked indifferent in horror. This person was definitely not the first hurdle of the longevity realm like him. At least, he was at the peak of the first hurdle. He was not his opponent at all. Thinking of this, Wei Zun glanced at Wei Yanghong, who still had the desire to survive in his eyes. A ruthless look flashed across his face. When Wei Zhanzhan and other princes and princesses were stunned, he decisively ordered, You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.